Bedtime history, ancient feasts, and forgotten lives. Hey guys, tonight we're kicking off a new adventure. One that's less about lofty philosophy and way more about the gritty, greasy, glorious world of ancient food. We're diving into the meals that fueled warriors, wanderers, and kings. From sizzling skewers on windswept plains to sacred brews in desert temples. No drive-thrus, no food blogs, just raw, sometimes bizarre dishes that kept people alive in a world where every bite was a gamble. Some were mouth-watering, some were mildly terrifying, but all of them were the heartbeat of ancient life. So, grab a snack, maybe not horse jerky, and let's savor the flavors of history together. Before you settle in, take a quick second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're genuinely vibing with what I do here. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from, what time it is there, and the weirdest food you've ever tried. It's always wild to see who's joining us from around the globe to chew on these historical tales. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. In a world where dinner might be a stolen apple or a sacred brew, we're about to taste the triumphs and terrors of ancient kitchens. Part 1. Nomad's Feast. Survival on the Steppe. Close your eyes for a moment. You're not curled up on your couch anymore. You're out there, on the endless Eurasian steppe. Around 700 BCE, the horizon stretches forever, a sea of grass swaying under a sky so vast it feels like it's pressing down on you. The wind howls, carrying the scent of earth and horse sweat. You're a Scythian nomad, astride a wiry stallion, your bow slung across your back, your stomach growling like it's ready to start a rebellion. There's no supermarket, no fridge, not even a sketchy tavern with questionable stew. Your next meal depends on what you can hunt, gather, or stuff into a leather satchel that's seen better days. Welcome to the nomad's table, where food wasn't just sustenance. It was survival, ritual, and sometimes a wild ride. The Eurasian steppe, sprawling from Eastern Europe to Central Asia, was home to some of history's toughest eaters. Tribes like the Scythians, Sarmatians, and later the Mongols. These weren't people who fussed over plating or flavor profiles. They were masters of mobility, living in felt tents called yurts, moving with their herds, and eating whatever the land or their animals could offer. The steppe was a brutal chef, serving up blistering summers, freezing winters, and not a single salad bar in sight. Your diet, whatever you could carry, kill, or coax out of a horse. It was rugged, resourceful, and occasionally brilliant, shaped by a life where stopping meant starving. So, what's cooking? Let's start with the main course. Meat, and plenty of it. The nomads were herders, so their pantry was a living, breathing herd of sheep, goats, cattle, and, most crucially, horses. Horse meat was the star of the show. Lean, tough, and packed with protein to keep you going through a day of riding or fighting. You'd slaughter a young stallion, maybe one that didn't make the cut as a warhorse, and roast it over a crackling fire of dried dung and grass. No fancy grills here, just a spit or a flat stone heated until it glowed. The taste, picture beef, but earthier, with a sweet, gamey kick that hits like a punch you didn't see coming. It wasn't fine dining, but when you're starving under a sky full of stars, it was a 5-star feast. The Scythians, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, were next-level practical. If they were in a hurry, say, chasing enemies or fleeing a rival tribe, they'd skip the fire altogether. They'd slice the meat into thin strips, tuck it under their saddle, and let the horses' heat and sweat cook it as they rode. Sounds like a health code violation? Sure, but it was efficient. And those strips, half raw and salty, kept you alive. Herodotus, who wasn't exactly a fan, called them barbarians for it. But let's be real. When your kitchen is a saddlebag, you do what works. Now, let's raise a toast to the nomad's secret weapon. Kumis. The fermented mare's milk, that was their energy drink. Social glue and sacred potion all rolled into one. Making kumis was part science, part sorcery. First, you had to milk a mare, which is like trying to negotiate with a grumpy coworker who could kick you into next week. You'd coax out the milk, pour it into a leather bag, and add a starter culture, maybe some leftover kumis from the last batch. Then, you'd hang the bag on your saddle or a yurt pole, letting it churn as you rode or shook it by hand. Over a few days, the milk fermented into a fizzy, slightly alcoholic brew, tangy as yogurt, sharp as sour beer, and just boozy enough to make you forget the frostbite creeping up your toes. Kumis was a game changer. In a land where water was often scarce or suspect, it was a safe, nutrient-packed drink. It had vitamins, probiotics, and enough calories to keep you riding for days. The taste. Imagine a smoothie that's half Greek yogurt, half cheap Prosecco, with a whiff of horse stable thrown in. Not your thing, fine. But for the nomads, it was liquid gold. They drank it at feasts, offered it to their sky gods, and used it to seal deals with rival tribes. It was so central to their life that some Scythian burials, found in frozen kurgans, include leather flasks still smelling faintly of fermented milk. That's dedication. But the nomads weren't just carnivores with a milk obsession. They had carbs too, though their bread was less artisan sourdough and more survival puck. Picture yourself by a campfire, the steppe stretching dark and silent around you. You've got a sack of barley or millet, maybe traded from some settled farmers you met last spring. You grind the grain with a stone, mix it with water, and if you're feeling fancy, a splash of kumis or mare's milk for flavor. No yeast, no oven, just your hands shaping the dough into flat discs. You slap them onto hot rocks by the fire or bury them in the embers. And a few minutes later, you've got flatbread, dense, heavy, and tough enough to survive a week in your saddlebag. It wasn't fluffy, but paired with a chunk of roasted mutton or a smear of fat. It was a meal that said, "You're not dead yet." What made nomad food so gripping wasn't just the recipes. It was the stakes. Every meal was a story of survival. Take their feasts. For instance, when tribes gathered, whether to mourn a fallen leader, seal an alliance, or celebrate a raid, food became a sacred act. You'd slaughter a horse, the ultimate offering, its meat shared in a communal pot, its blood mixed with milk for a ritual drink. Herodotus tells us the Scythians boiled meat in the animal's hide, using its bones as fuel if wood was scarce. Waste nothing. Honor everything. These feasts were about more than hunger. They were about trust, power, the unspoken vow that your tribe was your shield against the steppe's cruelty. Let's not kid ourselves. Though, this wasn't a life of culinary bliss. Food was unpredictable, sometimes scarce, sometimes straight up weird. If a hunt failed, or the herds dwindled, you might be digging for roots, chewing wild onions, or boiling horsehide into a grim broth. Preservation was a constant battle. Meat was dried in the sun, strung like jerky on ropes, or smoked over fires to last the winter. Milk was fermented to keep it from turning. Fat was rendered into portable calorie bombs. Marrow sucked from bones. Hooves boiled for glue or soup. It sounds brutal. But these people were pragmatists. You didn't whine about a tough meal when the alternative was an empty stomach and a long, cold night. The nomads' ingenuity shines in how they stretched every resource. Take cheese. For example, some steppe tribes, like the early Mongols, turned mare's milk into hard, salty discs, pressing curds into molds and drying them until they were rock solid. These weren't your creamy brie veggies, more like sour, funky pucks you'd gnaw on while cursing the wind. Archaeological finds in Mongolia and Kazakhstan show these cheeses could last months, perfect for long treks across the steppe. It's a reminder that these weren't just warriors. They were innovators, turning milk into a snack that could outlast a siege. Their food also tells us about their soul. The steppe wasn't just a place, it was a way of life. And every meal reflected that. Kumis wasn't just a drink. It was a portable lifeline that kept armies moving. Flatbreads were a testament to minimalism. Proof you could bake without a kitchen. Feasts, with their blood and fire, bound tribes together in a world where trust was as scarce as trees. The Scythians weren't cooking for Instagram. They were cooking to conquer hunger, distance, and death itself. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact excavations in Scythian kurgans, like those in Pazyryk, Siberia, have uncovered cooking tools, horse bones, and traces of fermented dairy, confirming their reliance on meat and kumis. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, describes their diet and rituals, though he's a bit snooty, calling them savages who drink from enemy skulls. Fair, but those skulls were a flex, a way to say, don't mess with us. Odd detail, some nomads used horse fat as a kind of proto-butter, smearing it on bread or mixing it into stews for extra calories. Finds in frozen burials show pots with fatty residues. Proof they squeezed every ounce of energy from their animals. There's a debate among historians. Did the nomads' diet give them a military edge? Some argue they're high protein. Portable foods like kumis and jerky let them outmaneuver settled armies who needed supply chains. Others say their reliance on herds made them vulnerable to drought or raids. Either way, their food was a weapon, fueling conquests that shook empires. So, here we are, back in your world. The hum of your fan, a soft echo of the steppe's wind. The nomad's food wasn't fancy, but it was real. A story of grit and genius. You think your meal prep is tough. Try milking a horse in a snowstorm or roasting a sheep with nothing but a fire and a prayer. These people ate to live, and their meals weave a tale of resilience, ritual, and a surprising amount of flavor. Before we ride off, I want to hear from you. Would you sip kumis or chomp on saddle-cooked horse meat? Drop a comment with the strangest food you've ever tried, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these journeys tastier. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more. And join us next time as we head to the Viking hearths, where the food was as fierce as the warriors who ate it. For now, dim the lights, zafor your snack, and dream of the steppe's endless horizon. Bedtime history, ancient feasts, and forgotten lives. Hey guys, we're back for another bite of history. And tonight, we're trading the windswept steppes for the icy fjords of the north. If you thought the nomads had it tough, wait until you see what the Vikings were chowing down on. No grocery stores. No takeout. Just a world where your dinner might freeze before you could eat it. So, grab a warm drink, maybe not fermented fish juice, and let's dig into the flavors that fueled some of history's fiercest warriors. Before you get too cozy, hit that like button and subscribe. But only if you're loving these historical feasts. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from, what time it is there, and the weirdest winter meal you've ever had. It's awesome to see who's joining us from around the globe to warm up with these tales. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's sail into tonight's journey. In a land of frost and fire, we're about to taste the Viking way of life. Part 2. Viking Hearth. Eating to survive the North. Picture this. You're not sprawled on your couch anymore. You're in a longhouse on the rugged coast of Norway. Around 900 CE. The wind howls outside, rattling the sod walls, and the sea roars like it's got a personal grudge. Inside, a fire crackles in the center, smoke curling up to the thatched roof, stinging your eyes. You're a Viking, maybe a farmer, maybe a raider. Your hands calloused from rowing or wielding an axe. Your stomach's rumbling, and the only thing standing between you and dinner is a barrel of questionable fish and a winter that's been going on for approximately forever. Welcome to the Viking kitchen, where food wasn't just a meal. It was a battle against the North's relentless chill. The Viking world, stretching from Norway to Denmark, Sweden, and their far-flung colonies like Iceland and Greenland, was no place for the faint of stomach. These were people who sailed across stormy seas, hacked out farms from frozen earth, and laughed in the face of frostbite. Their diet was shaped by a brutal climate, where summers were short, winters were endless, and the growing season was more of a polite suggestion than a guarantee. You didn't eat for pleasure. You ate to survive, to power through raids, voyages, or just another day of not freezing solid. But don't think it was all grim. The Vikings were resourceful, their food hearty, and their feasts the stuff of sagas. So, what's on the table? Let's start with the backbone of the Viking diet. Fish. And not the sushi-grade stuff you're picturing. The North Sea and Baltic were teeming with cod, herring, and salmon, and the Vikings were masters at catching them. Fresh fish was a treat. Grilled over the fire, or boiled in a soapstone pot with a pinch of salt, and maybe some wild leeks, if you were lucky. But fresh wasn't always an option. So they got creative. Enter stockfish. Cod dried on wooden racks until it was hard as a plank. You could store it for years, carry it on long voyages, and rehydrate it in water or stew. The taste imagined jerky, but fishier, with a texture that fought back. It wasn't gourmet, but when you're stranded in Greenland, it was a lifeline. Then there's the Vikings' other obsession. Meat. If you lived near a farm, you had access to cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs. Though slaughtering was a big decision, animals were more valuable, alive for milk or wool. When you did butcher, nothing went to waste. You'd roast a leg of mutton over the fire, the fat sizzling and popping, filling the longhouse with a smell that made everyone forget the snow outside. The rest was boiled into stews with barley, turnips, or whatever roots you'd dug up before the ground froze. Offal, heart, liver, even blood, was turned into sausages or puddings. A rich, iron-heavy meal that kept you warm. The taste earthy, heavy, and probably better if you didn't ask too many questions. But the Vikings weren't just carnivores. They were farmers too, and grains like barley and oats were their carbs of choice. Barley was ground into flour and baked into flatbreads on hot stones, much like the nomad's bread. But denza, with a nutty bite, or it was boiled into porridge, a thick, stick-to-your-ribs sludge that could be sweet with honey or savoury with bits of fish or bacon. Porridge was the Viking equivalent of comfort food. The kind of meal you ate while listening to a skald spin tales of Thor and giants. It wasn't sexy, but it was fuel. And in a world where calories were king, that was enough. Now, let's talk about the Vikings' liquid courage. Mead and ale. Water was often dicey, so fermented drinks were the go-to. Ale was brewed from barley, sometimes flavoured with bog myrtle or juniper, and drunk daily, even by kids. Since it was safer than the local stream, it was low alcohol, bitter, and cloudy, less like craft beer and more like a slightly boozy soup. Mead, on the other hand, was the stuff of legend, made from fermented honey and reserved for feasts or rituals. Picture a warrior raising a horn of mead, toasting Odin before a raid. The taste, sweet, floral, with a warmth that spread from your chest to your toes. It was the Viking equivalent of a victory lap, and they drank it like they meant it. The real magic of Viking food was how they made it last. Preservation was a survival skill in a land where winter could stretch for 6 months. Fish was dried, smoked, or fermented in barrels until it smelled like a sailor's nightmare, but tasted like salty heaven. Meat was hung in smoky longhouses, the fire's haze keeping bugs at bay. Dairy was another big player. Milk from cows, sheep, or goats was churned into butter, pressed into cheese, or fermented into skyr, a thick, tangy yogurt that's still a staple in Iceland today. Skyr was a protein bomb, tart and creamy, perfect for spreading on bread or eating by the spoonful. The Vikings even buried butter in bogs, sealing it in wooden containers to age like a fine wine. Archaeologists have found bog butter that's centuries old, still edible if you're brave enough. Feasts were where Viking food shone brightest. Picture a longhouse packed with warriors, farmers, and their families. The fire roaring, the air thick with smoke and laughter. A chieftain might host a feast to celebrate a successful raid, a wedding, or just to flex his wealth. You'd slaughter a pig or goat, roast it whole, and pile the table with bread, cheese, and dried fish. Ale and mead flowed from barrels, and everyone drank from wooden cups or horns, shouting toasts to the gods, ancestors, or the guy who punched a bear last week. The sagas tell us these feasts could last days, with storytelling, wrestling, and the occasional drunken brawl. Food wasn't just nourishment. It was a bond, a way to prove your loyalty and cement your place in the clan. But let's not romanticize too much. Viking life was brutal, and food could be a struggle. If the harvest failed or the fish didn't run, you might be boiling seaweed or gnawing on leather straps. Starvation was a real threat, especially in far-flung colonies like Greenland, where archaeological digs show signs of malnutrition in tough years. Even in good times, the diet was monotonous. Barley porridge for breakfast, dried fish for lunch, more porridge for dinner. Variety was a luxury, and spices were rare unless you'd raided a Frankish monastery with a well-stocked pantry. When you did score something exotic, like walnuts or wine from a southern trade, it was a big deal. A taste of a world beyond the fjords. The Vikings' food tells us who they were. Not just raiders, but farmers, traders, and survivors. Their preservation techniques, like smoking and fermenting, were ingenious, letting them sail to Vinland or raid Paris without starving. Their feasts were a masterclass in community, turning a meal into a saga of loyalty and pride. Even their daily grind, stirring porridge or salting fish, was a quiet act of defiance against a world that wanted them dead. These weren't people who ate for fun. They ate to conquer the north, one bite at a time. Let's anchor this in history. Mainstream fact archaeological sites like Lanceau Meadows in Newfoundland and Birka in Sweden have uncovered fish bones, barley grains, and cheese-making tools, confirming the Vikings' reliance on fish, grains, and dairy. The sagas, like Egil's saga, describe feasts with roasted meat and flowing ale, though they're a bit dramatic. More Marvel movie than documentary. Odd detail: some Vikings fermented shark, a dish called herkal, burying it underground for months until it was pungent enough to scare off a troll. It's still eaten in Iceland today, though modern folks pair it with a shot of schnapps to survive the smell. Historians debate whether the Viking diet was sustainable. Some say their high protein, preserved foods gave them the edge to explore and conquer. Others argue their dependence on fish and livestock made them vulnerable to climate shifts, like the Little Ice Age that hit Greenland hard. Either way, their food was a mirror of their world. Tough, practical, and fiercely alive. So, here we are, back in your warm, modern world. The fans hum, a faint echo of the North Sea's roar. The Vikings' food wasn't fancy, but it was real. A story of grit, fire, and the kind of ingenuity that turns fish into jerky and milk into yogurt. You think your winter grocery run is rough? Try salting cod in a blizzard or brewing ale with half-frozen hands. These people ate to live, and their meals weave a tale of survival, saga, and a surprising amount of heart. Before we sail off, I want to hear from you. Would you munch on stockfish or sip mead from a horn? Drop a comment with the weirdest winter food you've tried, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these feasts even richer. Hit subscribe if you're craving more. And join us next time as we head to Babylon's golden halls, where the food was fit for kings and the parties never stopped. For now, dim the lights, Zafor your snack, and dream of the fjords. Before we dive into tonight's feast, take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe. But only if you're savoring these historical bites. Drop a comment with where you're tuning in from, what time it is there, and the fanciest meal you've ever had. It's always a treat to see who's joining us from around the globe to dig into the past. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's journey to a city of golden dreams. Part 3, Babylon's Banquet, Feasts of Mesopotamia. You've left the icy fjords behind. The Viking fires glow, fading as a new heat shimmers into view. You're now standing in the heart of Babylon, around 1800 BCE, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers cradle a city that's more myth than mortar. Towering ziggurats pierce the sky, their baked brick steps gleaming under a sun that never seems to blink. The air hums with the chatter of merchants, the clink of bronze coins, and the sizzle of something roasting in a nearby courtyard. You're a guest at a royal banquet, maybe a diplomat, maybe a favored priest. Your linen robe brushing the floor as you step into a hall draped in tapestries. Your stomach's rumbling. But this isn't a grab-and-go meal. This is Babylon, where food is power, pleasure, and a direct line to the gods. Welcome to the king's table, where every bite is a flex and every feast a spectacle. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, was the cradle of civilization, home to Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians who built cities like Uruk, and Babylon itself. These weren't dusty outposts but urban marvels, with irrigated fields, bustling markets, and palaces that made Viking longhouses look like garden sheds. Food here wasn't just about survival. It was a statement. For the elite, meals were a chance to flaunt wealth, seal alliances, or appease gods like Marduk, who apparently had a thing for roasted lamb. The Babylonians ate well, or at least the rich did, their tables groaning under dishes that took days to prepare and cost more than a farmer's yearly wages. But even in this land of plenty, every feast was a reminder of the river's bounty and the gods' fickle moods. So, what's on the menu? Let's start with the centerpiece: roasted meat. And not just any meat. Lamb was the star, fattened on lush river pastures, slaughtered young for tenderness, and roasted over tamarisk wood until the skin crackled and the juices ran clear. You'd season it with cumin, coriander, or fennel, spices traded from distant lands, their aroma filling the hall like a victory march. The taste, rich, smoky, with a spice kick that lingers like a good story. For the truly elite, you might get something wilder: lion or gazelle, hunted by the king himself to prove his prowess. It wasn't about flavor. It was about bragging rights. A way to say, "I killed this. Now eat it." The meat was carved at the table, served on bronze platters, and paired with sauces made from garlic, leeks, and fermented fish paste. A funky cousin to modern fish sauce that tied every bite together. But Babylon wasn't all carnivore swagger. Grains were the backbone of the diet. Thanks to the fertile fields fed by the rivers, barley was king. Ground into flour for flatbreads, baked in clay ovens called tanners. These breads were soft, slightly charred, with a nutty bite that soaked up every drop of stew or sauce. You'd tear off a piece, scoop up a dollop of lentil stew, and call it perfection. For fancier feasts, you might get pastries stuffed with dates or onions, flaky and golden, a little like a proto-samosa that whispered of decadence. The Babylonians even had a kind of dessert bread, sweetened with honey and studded with sesame seeds, a treat that felt like a hug from the gods. Vegetables and fruits played a supporting role, but they weren't slouches. Onions, leeks, and garlic were staples, tossed into stews or eaten raw for their bite. Cucumbers and chickpeas showed up in salads, dressed with olive oil and vinegar, a refreshing break from the meat parade. Dates were the real showstopper. Babylon's candy, grown in groves along the rivers. You'd stuff them with almonds or pistachios, drizzle them with honey, and serve them as a sweet finale. The taste, like caramel with a nutty crunch. So good you'd forget the stewed goat. You just ate for the ultra-rich pomegranates or figs, imported from afar, were a flex. Their ruby seeds, a reminder of trade routes stretching to the edge of the world. Now, let's pour a drink, because no Babylonian feast was complete without beer, the liquid soul of Mesopotamia. Beer wasn't just a beverage here. It was a gift from the goddess Ninkasi, whose hymn doubles as the world's oldest recipe. Brewers, often women, baked a special barley bread called bapir, crumbled it into vats of water, and let it ferment with dates or honey for sweetness. The result was thick, cloudy, and slightly boozy, more like a smoothie than a pint. You'd sip it through reed straws to filter out the grit. The tangy, malty flavor washing down the lamb like a river cleansing the soul. For the elite, you might get a refined version, filtered and flavored with saffron or myrrh, served in silver goblets that screamed wealth. Wine was rarer, imported from the Levant, but when it appeared, it was a power move, a way to say, "I can afford this. Bow down." The real art of Babylonian food was the feast itself, a performance as much as a meal. Picture a palace hall, its walls painted with lions and lotus flowers, lit by oil lamps that cast a golden glow. Musicians strum lyres, dancers sway in linen skirts, and servants glide through the crowd with platters of food. The king sits at the head, his beard oiled, his crown glinting, every dish a testament to his rule. You'd start with appetizers, barley cakes with cheese or pickled fish, then move to the main event, roasted meats and stews served with mounds of bread, desserts, dates, pastries, or honey-soaked cakes, capped the night, followed by more beer or wine until the stars faded. These feasts weren't just about eating. They were diplomacy, religion, power. A good banquet could seal a treaty. A bad one could start a war. For the gods, food was even more serious. Temples like the Esagila, dedicated to Marduk, were culinary hubs, where priests prepared daily offerings of meat, bread, and beer. Clay tablets from Babylon, list menus for the gods. Hundreds of sheep, gallons of beer, all cooked with rituals as precise as a royal decree. The food was shared with priests and worshippers, a sacred recycling that fed the community. Feasts for festivals, like the Akitu New Year, went bigger, with whole oxen roasted and rivers of beer poured out as libations. Eating wasn't just nourishment, it was communion, a way to keep the gods happy and the world spinning. Let's not kid ourselves. Though, this lavish life was for the elite. Commoners in Babylon ate simpler. Barley porridge, lentil stews, maybe a scrap of fish or goat if they were lucky. Their beer was coarser, their bread tougher, their dates unpitted and unstuffed. Life was hard for farmers and labourers, who toiled in the fields to feed the city's grandeur. Even for the rich, food wasn't always safe. Spoiled grain, tainted water, or overripe meat could send you to the underworld faster than a chariot. And while the rivers gave life, floods or droughts could wipe out a harvest, leaving even the king's table bare. The Babylonians' food tells us who they were. Not just city dwellers, but dreamers who turned mud into empires. Their feasts were a stage for power, their offerings a plea for divine favour. Even their daily bread, baked in the heat of a tanner, was a quiet act of faith in the river's flow. These weren't people who ate for fun. They ate to rule, to worship, to live in a world where every meal was a gift from the gods. Let's anchor this in history. Mainstream fact clay tablets from Babylon, like those in the British Museum, list royal menus and temple offerings, confirming their love for lamb, dates, and beer. Excavations at Ur and Babylon reveal tanner ovens, brewing vats, and date pits, proof of a thriving food culture. Odd detail. Some Babylonian recipes included gazelle blood or ostrich eggs, rare delicacies that sound like a chef's fever dream. The hymn to Ninkasi, from 1800 BCE, is both a prayer and a beer recipe, showing how sacred brewing was. Historians debate the sustainability of Babylon's feasts. Some say their irrigation and trade networks let them live large, outshining rival empires. Others argue their reliance on the rivers made them fragile, a drought away from collapse. Either way, their food was a mirror of their world, opulent, precarious, and deeply divine. So, here you are, back in your modern world. The fans hum, a faint echo of Babylon's lyres. The Babylonians' food wasn't subtle, but it was real, a saga of wealth, worship, and the kind of creativity that turns barley into beer and dates into dessert. You think your dinner party's a hassle? Try roasting a lion or brewing beer for a god. These people ate to live, and their feasts weave a tale of power, faith, and a surprising amount of spice. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Would you sip Ninkasi's beer or munch on a date-stuffed pastry? Drop a comment with the fanciest meal you've tried, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these banquets even richer. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more. And join us next time as we head to the Nile's banks, where commoners ate to build pyramids and live forever. For now, dim the lights, zafor your snack, and dream of Babylon's golden halls. Before we sink into tonight's tale, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. But only if you're loving these historical flavors. Drop a comment with where you're tuning in from, what time it is there, and the most humble meal you've ever eaten. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the globe to taste the past. Now, dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's drift to the banks of the Nile. Part 4. Nile's sustenance, commoners of ancient Egypt, the golden halls of Babylon fade, their opulence dissolving into the dusty heat of a new world. You're now in a mud brick village along the Nile, around 2500 BCE, where the river's green ribbon cuts through an endless sea of sand. The sun beats down, relentless, baking the earth and your bare feet as you trudge home from a long day in the fields. You're an Egyptian commoner, maybe a farmer, maybe a laborer hauling limestone for a pharaoh's pyramid. Your hands are caked with silt, your back aches, and your stomach's grumbling like it's auditioning for a thunderstorm. There's no royal banquet waiting, no silver goblets or date-stuffed pastries. Your dinner is whatever you can scrape together from the river's bounty and your own sweat. Welcome to the table of ancient Egypt's working class, where every meal was a small victory against the desert's grip. Ancient Egypt wasn't just the land of pharaohs and gilded tombs. It was a civilization built on the backs of farmers, fishermen, and laborers who coaxed life from the Nile's floodwaters. The river was everything, a lifeline that turned barren sand into fertile fields, feeding millions in a world where one bad harvest could mean starvation. For the common folk, food wasn't about luxury. It was about survival, fueling the endless cycle of planting, harvesting, and building monuments that would outlast them all. Their diet was simple, repetitive, and practical, shaped by the Nile's rhythms and the gods' unpredictable moods. But don't think it was all bland. These people knew how to make the most of what they had, turning humble ingredients into meals that kept an empire running. So, what's for dinner? Let's start with the cornerstone of every Egyptian meal. Bread. The kind of bread that could double as a doorstop or a prayer. Emmer, wheat, and barley were the main grains, grown in the Nile's rich silt and ground into coarse flour on stone querns. You'd mix the flour with water, maybe a pinch of salt, and knead it into a dense dough. No yeast, no fancy proofing, just your hands and a lot of elbow grease. The dough was shaped into flat rounds or cones and baked in clay ovens, often communal ones shared by the village. The result, a heavy, chewy loaf with a crust like armor and a nutty flavor that tasted of the earth itself. You'd tear off a chunk, dip it in a stew, or use it as a scoop for beans. It wasn't fluffy, but it was life, filling your belly and giving you the strength to haul another block up a pyramid ramp. Next up, vegetables. The unsung heroes of the Egyptian plate. The Nile's banks were a garden, yielding onions, leeks, garlic, lentils, and chickpeas. Onions were a favorite, eaten raw for their sharp bite or boiled into stews with lentils and a splash of Nile water. Garlic was practically a medicine. Chewed to ward off illness, or tossed into every dish for its punch. Lentils were a staple, simmered into a thick, earthy stew that was cheap, filling, and could feed a family for days. You'd season with whatever you had. Maybe cumin or coriander from a market trader. Those spices were a luxury for most. Greens like lettuce or radish leaves showed up when the season allowed, tossed in simple salads with a drizzle of sesame oil. The taste, honest, hearty, with a freshness that cut through the desert's dust. Protein was trickier, but the Nile had your back. Fish was a go-to. Catfish, tilapia, or perch, pulled from the river with nets or spears. You'd gut them by the water's edge, grill them over a fire, or dry them in the sun for later. Fresh fish was a treat, flaky and mild, with a smoky edge from the fire. Dried fish was tougher, salty and chewy, but it lasted months and was perfect for lean times. Meat was rare for commoners, reserved for festivals, or when a pharaoh handed out rations during big projects. If you scored some, it was usually goat or mutton, boiled into a stew or roasted on a spit. The taste, gamey, tough, but a rare burst of richness that made you feel like royalty for a night. Birds like ducks or geese, snared in the marshes, were another treat. Their fatty meat a luxury you savoured slowly. Fruit was Egypt's dessert, a gift from the Nile's orchards. Dates were the star, sweet and sticky, plucked from palm trees and eaten fresh or dried for year-round snacking. You'd bite into one, the caramel-like flesh melting in your mouth, a burst of sugar that made the day's toil feel worth it. Figs and grapes showed up in season, juicy and fleeting, often bartered at markets for a handful of grain. For the poorest, fruit was a dream, but even a single date could feel like a blessing, a reminder that the gods hadn't forgotten you. Now, let's talk about the lifeblood of ancient Egypt. Beer. Not just a drink, but a food, a wage, and a sacred offering. Beer was everywhere, brewed in every village, every home, by women who were part chemist, part priestess. You'd start with barley bread, baked just enough to crumble, then mix it with water and dates for sweetness. The slurry fermented in clay jars under the sun, turning into a thick, cloudy brew that was more like a meal than a beverage. It was low alcohol, tangy, and packed with nutrients, sipped through straws to avoid the chunks. Workers drank it daily, sometimes 4 liters. It was hydration, calories, and a morale boost in one. The taste, imagine a sour, malty shake, not exactly refreshing. But when you're hauling stones under a blazing sun, it was liquid salvation. Even kids got a diluted version. And pharaohs offered it to the gods like it was liquid gold. Eating wasn't just about hunger. It was about community. Most meals were shared. Families gathered around a low table, dipping bread into a communal pot of lentils, passing fish or dates hand to hand. Villages were tight-knit, and food was a bond. If you worked on the pyramids, you ate in camps. The pharaoh's overseers handed out rations of bread, beer, and onions, enough to keep you swinging a hammer. Tomb paintings show workers sitting together, laughing over their bowls. A moment of rest in a life of labor. Festivals were the big exception, when temples distributed meat or beer, and everyone, from farmers to fishermen, feasted like they were part of something eternal. But life was no feast for most. Commoners worked dawn to dusk, their meals tied to the Nile's whims. A bad flood meant a lean year. Too much water could drown your crops. Too little could starve them. Food spoiled fast in the heat, and pests were a constant threat. You'd store grain in clay jars, pray rats didn't get in, and hope your beer didn't turn to vinegar. Even the best meals were simple. Bread, lentils, a fish, if you were lucky, day after day. Luxuries like meat or spices were for the rich, who ate beef and pomegranates in palaces while you chewed your barley crust. Yet there was pride in this life. You were feeding Egypt, building its gods' houses, your labor etched into the stones of eternity. The commoners' food tells us who they were. Not just workers, but the heartbeat of a civilization. Their bread was a testament to the Nile's gift. Their beer, a daily prayer to the gods. Their shared meals were a quiet defiance against the desert's threat. A way to say, we're still here. These weren't people who ate for glory. They ate to build, to live, to leave a legacy that still awes us today. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact: tomb paintings and papyri, like those from Deir el Medina, show workers' rations of bread, onbir, and onions, confirming their simple diet. Excavations at Giza reveal fish bones, lentil residues, and brewing fats, proof of a diet tied to the river. Odd detail: some Egyptians ate lotus roots, a starchy snack that sounds poetic until you realize it tasted like muddy cardboard. The ostraca texts, workers' records, list beer quotas, showing it was as vital as wages. Historians debate the health of Egypt's commoners. Some say their diet, high in grains and beer, was nutritious enough to fuel massive projects. Others argue the lack of variety and frequent famines took a toll, with mummies showing signs of anemia or worn teeth from gritty bread. Either way, their food was a mirror of their world. Humble, resilient, and deeply tied to the Nile. So, here you are, back in your modern world. The fans hum, a faint echo of the Nile's flow. The commoner's food wasn't grand, but it was real. A story of labor, faith, and the kind of grit that turns grain into bread and water into beer. You think your budget meal's a struggle? Try baking bread in a desert or brewing beer for a god. These people ate to live, and their meals weave a tale of survival, community, and a surprising amount of heart. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Would you sip Nile beer or munch on a lotus root? Drop a comment with the most humble meal you've tried, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these meals even richer. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more, and join us next time as we head to the sunlit halls of ancient Greece, where wine and wisdom flowed in equal measure. For now, dim the lights, zafor your snack, and dream of the Nile's endless green. Before we pour into tonight's tale, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you're savoring these historical morsels. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, what time it is there, and the most memorable party you've ever been to. It's always a delight to see who's joining us from around the globe to taste these ancient stories. Turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's drift to the sunlit hills of Greece. Part 5. Greek Symposia, Wine and Wisdom. The Nile's muddy banks fade. The labourers chatter, dissolving into a soft hum of voices and strings. You're now in Athens, around 432 BCE, lounging on a cushioned couch in a candlelit courtyard. The air is warm, scented with olive oil. Cicadas buzzing in the Acropolis, looming under a sky dusted with stars. You're a guest at a symposium, a wine-soaked gathering of philosophers. Poots, your sandals kicked off, a clay cup of wine in hand. No one's rushing to a banquet table or toiling over a stew pot. This isn't about filling your belly, it's about savouring the moment. sparking ideas, and maybe flirting with the gods of wit and wisdom. The table's set with olives and bread. But the real feast is the conversation. Welcome to the Greek Symposium, where every sip was a step toward enlightenment, or at least a good argument. Ancient Greece wasn't just the land of marble temples and epic wars, it was a world of ideas, where city-states like Athens and Corinth buzzed with debate, art, and a love for living well. The symposium, literally drinking together, was the heart of elite social life. A men-only affair, Ladies. More on that later, where the wealthy gathered to eat, drink, and wrestle with life's big questions. These weren't rowdy keggers, but carefully choreographed evenings, with rules, rituals, and a vibe that screamed, "We're civilized." But let's get a little wild. Food was light, wine was plentiful, and the goal was to leave smarter, or at least think you were. For the Greeks, a good meal fed the mind as much as the body, and the symposium was their stage. So, what's on the menu? Don't expect a Babylonian meat fest or a Viking roast. Greek symposia were all about restraint. Small bites that left room for wine and words. First up, bread. But not the dense Egyptian loaves. You'd get soft, wheaten flatbreads, baked fresh and served with a drizzle of olive oil. Their golden crust, perfect for scooping up dips. The star was kykeon, a barley-based gruel, sometimes spiked with herbs or honey. Less a dish, and more a nod to tradition. Like eating oatmeal at a fancy dinner to honor your grandma. The taste nutty, heavy, with a hint of olive oil that tied it to the sun-baked hills. Then came the nibbles, what the Greeks called tragamata, snacks to keep you from passing out mid-debate. Olives were king, plump and briny, plucked from Attica's groves and cured in salt or vinegar. You'd pop one in your mouth, the sharp tang, waking you up like a philosophical slap. Cheese was another staple, usually goat's milk, soft and crumbly, with a sour kick that paired perfectly with wine. You might get sardines or anchovies, grilled or pickled, their salty bite a reminder of the sea just beyond the city walls. For something fancier, there'd be figs or grapes, fresh in summer, dried in winter. Their sweetness, a subtle flex of wealth. The taste light, fresh, a balance of salt and sweet that kept you reaching for more without weighing you down. Protein was rare, but when it appeared, it was a treat. You might get small skewers of pork or quail, roasted over charcoal with a sprinkle of thyme or oregano. The meat tender and smoky, served in bite-sized chunks. Or there'd be octopus, boiled, then grilled. Its chewy flesh kissed with olive oil and lemon. These weren't main courses, just accents, like a garnish that stole the show. The Greeks believed heavy food dulled the mind, so portions were tiny, the focus on flavor over fullness. It was less about stuffing your face, and more about savoring each bite, while Socrates grilled you on the meaning of justice. Now, let's talk about the real star. Wine, the lifeblood of the symposium. Water was for peasants, and beer was for barbarians. Wine, grown on Greece's rocky slopes, was a gift from Dionysus, god of revelry, and the Greeks treated it like holy nectar, but they weren't chugging it straight. That was for savages. You'd mix it with water, usually 2 parts water to 1 part wine, in a giant clay crater at the center of the room. The mix was poured into shallow kylix cups, their wide rims perfect for sipping and sloshing during toasts. The taste fruity, tart, with a resinous edge from the pine pitch used to seal the amphorae, diluted just enough to keep you sharp. Stronger blends were for later. When the philosophy gave way to poetry or drunken games, the symposium wasn't just about eating and drinking. It was a performance. Picture a courtyard ringed with couches, each holding 2 or 3 guests, reclining, like they're auditioning for a toga ad. A symposium. The party's MC. Set the rules. How much wine? What topics? Who sang next? You'd start with a light meal, the snacks laid out on low tables, then move to the drinking phase, where the real magic happened. Musicians played lyres or flutes, hired dancers or acrobats performed, and guests took turns reciting poetry, debating politics, or playing kotobos, a game where you flicked wine dregs at a target while shouting your crush's name. It was like karaoke, but with more existential dread and fewer microphones. Conversation was the heart of it all. You might argue about love with a poet, challenge a politician on war, or try to outwit a philosopher like Plato, who was probably scribbling notes for his next dialogue. The symposium was where ideas were born, from democracy to the theory of forms, fueled by wine and the glow of oil lamps. But it wasn't all highbrow. Things could get rowdy. Jokes turned crude. And by dawn, half the guests were singing off-key or passed out on their couches. The goal was balance. Euphrosyne, a state of joy that danced between sobriety and chaos. Women were mostly absent, except as entertainers or servers. Hetairæ, educated courtesans, sometimes joined, dazzling with wit and charm. But freeborn women were kept at home, hosting their own quieter gatherings. It was a man's world, flawed and exclusive. But the symposium's ideas rippled outward, shaping Greek culture and beyond. Food and wine were the spark, but the real feast was the exchange of minds. Let's not sugarcoat it. Though, symposia were for the elite, a tiny slice of society with the cash and time to lounge around debating beauty. Most Greeks, farmers, artisans, slaves, ate simpler. Barley porridge, olives, maybe a fish, if they lived by the sea. Wine was a luxury for them, often replaced by water or sour posca, even for the rich. Symposia could be risky. Too much wine led to fights, bad decisions, or waking up with a hangover that made you question your life choices. And while the food was fresh, spoilage was a constant threat. A bad olive or fish could send you to Hades faster than a Spartan spear. The symposium's food tells us who the Greeks were. Not just thinkers, but performers who turned a meal into a stage for ideas. Their light dishes were a nod to discipline, their wine a bridge to the divine. Even their games, like kotobos, were a playful defiance of the wars and politics outside. These weren't people who ate for survival alone. They ate to think, to dream, to live as if every night was a chance to touch eternity. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact pottery from Athens, like the red figure vases in the Louvre, shows symposia scenes, with guests reclining, craters brimming, and musicians playing. Plato's Symposium and Xenophon's writings describe the debates and rituals, though they're a bit idealized, like an Instagram filter on a messy party. Odd detail, some Greeks ate roasted grasshoppers as a snack, crunchy and nutty. A delicacy that sounds like a dare. The Ode to Wine by Anacreon captures the drink's sacred role, calling it a gift that loosens tongues and hearts. Historians debate the symposium's impact. Some say it was a crucible for democracy and philosophy, fostering free thought in a turbulent world. Others argue it was an elitist bubble, disconnected from the struggles of common Greeks. Either way, its food and wine were a mirror of their culture, refined, comunal, and endlessly curious. So, here you are, back in your modern world. The fans hum, a faint echo of a lyre's strum. The Greeks' food wasn't heavy, but it was real. A story of wit, wine, and the kind of creativity that turns olives into art and water into wisdom. You think your dinner party's a hassle? Try mixing wine for Plato or reciting poetry while dodging wine dregs. These people ate to live, and their symposia weave a tale of ideas, joy, and a surprising amount of soul. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Would you sip diluted wine or crunch a roasted grasshopper? Drop a comment with the most memorable party you've been to, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these gatherings richer. Hit subscribe if you're thirsty for more. And join us next time as we head to the bustling kitchens of ancient Rome, where feasts were as grand as empires. For now, savor your snack and dream of Athens' starry nights. Before we dive into tonight's feast, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you're relishing these historical bites. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, what time it is there, and the most over-the-top meal you've ever had. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from around the globe to savor these ancient tales. Turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's step into the bustling streets of Rome. Part 6. Roman kitchens. From plebs to patricians, the candlelit courtyards of Athens fade. The hum of lyres replaced by the clamour of a city that never sleeps. You're now in Rome, around 900 CE, weaving through a crowded insula, a teetering apartment block where the air smells of bread, sweat, and something faintly fishy. Or maybe you're reclining in a marble villa, a silver spoon in hand, surrounded by frescoed walls and the clink of goblets. You're a Roman, maybe a pleb, hustling for a crust, maybe a patrician plotting your next political move. Your stomach's growling, and dinner depends on your place in this sprawling empire. A bowl of porridge for the masses, or a peacock roast for the elite. Welcome to the Roman kitchen, where food was as divided as the classes. A mirror of a society that feasted on ambition as much as flavor. Rome wasn't just a city. It was a machine, an empire stretching from Britain's mists to Egypt's sands, fueled by grain, grit, and a knack for excess. Food here was everything. A daily struggle for the poor, a status symbol for the rich, and a glue that held a diverse empire together. The plebs, Rome's working class, ate to survive. Their meals simple and cheap, scraped together from state handouts and market stalls. The patricians, the elite, ate to impress. Their feasts a parade of wealth that could make a Babylonian king blush. But whether you were a baker or a senator, food was a ritual, a reminder of Rome's power and your place in it. From street-side snacks to sprawling banquets, every bite told a story of survival, splendor, or both. Let's start with the plebs, the backbone of Rome, whose diet was as basic as their brick tenements. The star was bread, crusty loaves of spelt or wheat, baked in communal ovens or bought from popinae, greasy food stalls that were the ancient equivalent of a corner deli. You'd get a coarse loaf called panis plebeius, gritty with millstone dust, but filling enough to keep you swinging a hammer or hauling goods at the docks. You'd tear it apart, dip it in a bowl of pulse, a porridge of spelt or barley boiled to a gloopy mess, maybe spiked with a pinch of salt or a sad onion. The taste bland, starchy, like eating a hug from someone who doesn't really mean it. But it was cheap, and when you're dodging rent collectors, cheap was king. Vegetables were a pleb's best friend, grown in small plots or bartered at markets. Lentils, chickpeas, and cabbage were staples, simmered into stews with garlic or leeks for a bit of zing. You'd eat them straight from the pot, the earthy warmth cutting through the chill of a Roman winter. Olive oil was a luxury, used sparingly to fry or drizzle. Its grassy bite, a rare treat. Fish was more common. Sardines or mackerel from the Tiber, grilled over a brazier or pickled in brine. The taste salty. Heavy, with a whiff of the river that wasn't exactly poetic. Meat was a dream. Maybe a scrap of pork or sausage on festival days. When temples handed out free cuts to keep the mob happy, the plebs' secret weapon was garum, Rome's infamous fish sauce, made by fermenting fish guts in salt until they turned into a pungent amber liquid. It was cheap, produced in bulk along the coast, and splashed into every dish. Stews, bread dips, even watered down as a drink. The taste, like soy sauce with an identity crisis. Umami, with a fishy kick that could wake the dead. Garum was Rome's ketchup, a flavor bomb that made even pulse taste like something worth living for. You'd buy it from street vendors, who'd ladle it from amphorae into your jug, the smell announcing your dinner plans to the whole neighborhood. Now, let's crash a patrician's party, where food was less about survival and more about showing off. Picture a triclinium, a dining room with 3 couches arranged in a U, where guests reclined like emperors, propped on silk cushions. The meal, called a cena, could last hours, with courses that read like a fever dream. You'd start with gustatio, appetizers like dormice stuffed with pork and herbs, or sea urchins drowned in honey and vinegar. The taste, sweet, savory, weirdly chewy, like eating a dare you didn't want to lose. Then came the prima mensa, main courses of roasted peacock, its feathers reattached for drama, or suckling pig, stuffed with sausages and figs. The meat was tender, dripping with garum-spiked sauces, each bite a reminder of your host's bank account. Desserts, or segunda mensa, were a sugar rush. Honey-soaked cakes studded with nuts, or pears poached in spiced wine. The taste, like Christmas in July, rich and fragrant, with a cinnamon kick that lingered. Wine was the lifeblood, Falernian or Caecuban, poured from ornate amphorae. Tui deep, fruity notes cut with water or spiced with myrrh for extra flair. You'd sip it from silver cups, toasting Jupiter or your host's latest political scheme. The cena wasn't just a meal. It was theatre, with slaves serving each course, musicians playing, and poets reciting odes to the host's greatness. It was excessive, indulgent, and exactly what Rome's elite thought they deserved. But the patricians didn't just eat to flex. They ate to network. A cena was a power play, where senators sealed deals, generals plotted campaigns, and ambitious upstarts kissed up to the right people. Food was a language. A stuffed ostrich said, "I'm rich." A rare spice from India said, "I'm connected." Even the seating mattered. The closer you were to the host, the higher your status. Slaves, often foreigners, kept the plates coming, their silent labor a stark reminder of Rome's conquests. The cena was Rome in microcosm, opulent, hierarchical, and built on the backs of the unseen. Let's be real, though, for the plebs, life was a grind, their meals monotonous. Bread, lentils, garum, repeat. Hunger was a constant shadow, especially in lean years when grain shipments from Egypt stalled. Riots broke out over bread shortages, and the state's free grain dole was as much about control as charity, even for the rich. Excess came at a cost. Overeating led to gout. Bad garum could poison you, and those lavish cenas often ended in vomiting sessions, courtesy of the vomitorium myth. Though that's more legend than fact, food was a gamble. Delicious one day, deadly the next. Roman food tells us who they were. Not just eaters, but architects of an empire where every meal reflected your rank. The plebs' porridge was a testament to endurance. The patricians' peacock, a hymn to ambition. Their shared love for garum was a rare thread tying high and low. A salty reminder that Rome was one city, even if it felt like two worlds. These weren't people who ate for fun. They ate to live, to rule, to dream of eternity. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact, Apicus's cookbook. De Re Coquinaria lists recipes for dormice and flamingo, confirming the elite's wild tastes. Pompey's preserved taverns and bakeries show plebs' reliance on bread and garum. With fish sauce, amphorae stacked like modern soda cans. Odd detail some romance at a sauzuda, boiled and sauced. A delicacy that sounds like a culinary prank. The Annona grain dole records show Rome's obsession with feeding its masses, a policy that kept the empire stable, or at least quiet. Historiens débattent Rome's food culture. Some say its diversity, from Egyptian grain to Indian spices, made it a global kitchen, unmatched until modern times. Others argue the gap between pleb and patrician diets fueled inequality, sowing seeds of unrest. Either way, their food was a mirror of their world. Vast, divided, and dripping with garum. So, here you are, back in your modern world. The fans hum, a faint echo of Rome's streets. Roman food was as wild as its empire. A gritty tale of porridge, fish sauce, and the kind of excess that turned dinner into destiny. You think your meal's fancy? Try stuffing a dormouse or surviving on pulse for a week. These people ate to live, and their kitchens built an empire, one plate at a time. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Would you splash garum on your stew or feast on a peacock's plume? Drop a comment with the most over-the-top meal you've had, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these feasts richer. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more. And join us next time as we wander the markets of Constantinople, where East met West in a swirl of spice and sizzle. For now, savor your snack and dream of Rome's eternal glow. Before we dive into tonight's sizzling tale, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. But only if you're craving these historical flavors. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, what time it is there, and the best street food you've ever tried. It's always a blast to see who's joining us from around the globe to taste these ancient stories. Turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's wander the vibrant streets of Constantinople. Part 7. Constantinople's street food. East meets West. The marble halls of Rome fade, their grandeur giving way to a new city pulsing with life. You're now in Constantinople, around 700 CE, weaving through a labyrinth of cobblestone alleys where the Bosphorus breeze carries the scent of sizzling meat and fresh bread. The Hagia Sophia's dome looms in the distance, its golden glow rivaled by the flicker of braziers at every corner. You're a city dweller, maybe a merchant haggling over silk, maybe a sailor fresh off a ship from Alexandria. Your stomach's growling, and you've got a few bronze coins jingling in your pouch. Enough for a quick bite from a street stall. No triclinium feasts or palace banquets here. Just the chaotic, delicious world of street food. Welcome to Constantinople's markets, where East met West in a swirl of spice, smoke, and sheer hustle. Constantinople, the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, wasn't just a city, it was a crossroads, straddling Europe and Asia. It linked Rome's legacy with the riches of Persia, India, and beyond. Traders, pilgrims, and soldiers flooded its streets, bringing flavors from every corner of the known world. Food here was a melting pot, a blend of Greek simplicity, Roman excess, and Eastern spice, served fast and cheap to a city that never stopped moving. Street food was the lifeblood of the urban poor, the middle class, and even the occasional noble slumming it for a taste of something real. From dawn to dusk, the markets buzzed with vendors shouting their wares, their stalls a riot of colour and aroma that made every walk a culinary gamble. So, what's cooking? Let's start with the king of street eats. Bread, the foundation of every meal. You'd find flatbreads, hot off clay ovens, their crusts blistered and golden, sold by bakers who'd been up since midnight. The most popular was pita, soft and chewy, perfect for wrapping around a skewer or scooping up a dip. Or you'd get artus, a denser loaf spiked with olive oil or sesame seeds, torn apart by hand and eaten on the go. The taste warm, nuttu, with a hint of smoke from the wood-fired oven. Like a hug you could chew. Bread was cheap, a staple for labourers who needed calories to haul crates or build walls, and versatile enough to pair with anything the market threw at you. Next up, meat, sizzling on skewers over glowing coals. The street vendor's art form, lamb and goat, were favourites, marinated in olive oil, garlic, and herbs like thyme or sumac, then grilled until the edges crisped and the juices ran. You'd get a souvlaki, chunks of meat threaded on a stick, handed over with a wedge of lemon and a sprinkle of salt. The taste smoky, tender, with a tangy kick that made you forget the dust on your sandals. Chicken was common too, spatchcocked and roasted whole, its skin crackling under your teeth. For the adventurous, there'd be offal, livers or hearts skewered and charred, cheap and rich, a protein punch for those who didn't mind a little grit. Vendors served these skewers wrapped in pita, the grease soaking through. A portable meal for a city, always on the move. Seafood was a close second. Thanks to the Bosphorus teeming with fish, you'd find sardines or mackerel, gutted and grilled whole, their skin blistered and salty from a dip in brine. Vendors piled them on bread, or served them with a side of chopped onions. The fish's oily richness, cut by a splash of vinegar. Mussels were another hit, steamed in clay pots with garlic and parsley, then ladled into bowls with their briny broth. The taste, like the sea itself, fresh and sharp, with a garlicky warmth that lingered. For a quick snack, you'd get fried anchovies, crispy as chips, sold by the handful and eaten like popcorn while you haggled over a bolt of cloth. Vegetables and dips rounded out the street scene, a nod to the Greek and Eastern influences swirling through the city. You'd find hummus, chickpeas mashed with sesame paste and olive oil, scooped up with pita or raw cucumber slices, oscordalia, a garlicky potato puree that could knock out a camel, served with fried fish or bread. Roasted eggplants were mashed into a smoky dip, spiked with lemon and herbs, a precursor to baba ganoush that felt like a party in your mouth. The taste creamy, tangy, with a depth that made you wonder why vegetables weren't the main event. Fresh greens, like purslane or dandelion, were sold in bunches, munched raw or tossed with oil for a bitter, refreshing bite. For something sweet, vendors offered yogurt, thick and tangy, drizzled with honey and sprinkled with walnuts or dried figs. It was cool, creamy, and just sweet enough to feel like a treat. Perfect for a sweltering afternoon. Or you'd get halva, a dense sesame paste sweetened with honey, cut into slabs and sold by weight, its nutty richness sticking to your teeth like a promise. Pastries were rarer, but you might find baklava's ancestor, layers of dough soaked in syrup and studded with pistachios, a sticky luxury that screamed Eastern trade routes. The taste, like dessert, had a passport, sweet and exotic, a reminder of Constantinople's global reach. Drinks kept the city hydrated, and wine was the crowd pleaser, served, diluted from amphorae, at wine stalls. It was cheap, tart, and poured into clay cups, its resinous bite a holdover from Greek days. For something stronger, there was kykion, a barley-based brew laced with herbs. Less boozy than beer, but with a medicinal kick. Non-drinkers sipped posca, vinegar water spiked with honey, a sour refreshment that doubled as a stomach settler, the taste, like a health tonic with attitude. Not exactly delicious, but it kept you going. Street vendors also sold herbal teas, steeped with mint or chamomile, served hot in winter or chilled in summer, a soothing break from the market's chaos. The real magic was the market itself, a sensory overload that made every meal an adventure. Picture the Grand Bazaar, or its early cousin, with stalls packed cheek by jowl, vendors shouting over each other, and the air thick with smoke, spice, and ambition. You'd dodge a donkey laden with olives, sidestep a juggler tossing canoes, and weave past a monk muttering prayers. Taverns, or tabernae, spilled onto the streets, their counters piled with bread, fish, and bowls of stew, serving dockworkers, soldiers, and merchants who didn't care about fancy plating. The vibe was chaotic, democratic, a place where a Persian trader could share a skewer with a Slavic sailor, united by hunger and the sizzle of lamb. Food wasn't just fuel. It was culture. Constantinople's street eats were a mashup of empires. Hrek pita met Persian spices. Roman garum gave way to Eastern yogurt. Vendors were storytellers, their recipes passed down from mothers or picked up on trade routes. A skewer of lamb might come with a tale of a caravan from Samarkand, a bowl of hummus with a nod to an Egyptian grandmother. These meals were cheap, but they carried the weight of a city that saw itself as the world's center, a place where every bite was a passport stamp. Let's not romanticize too much. Though, street life was tough. Vendors worked dawn to dusk, their hands blistered from coals or stained with fish guts. Food spoiled fast in the heat, and a bad muscle could send you to the afterlife faster than a chariot race. Hygiene was a suggestion, not a rule. Water was dicey, and flies were as much a part of the meal as the bread. For the poorest, street food was a luxury. Many survived on stale bread or charity from monasteries. Even the middle class felt the pinch. A bad harvest or war could spike prices, turning a skewer into a dream. And while the markets were vibrant, they were also a microcosm of the empire's tensions, where a Greek vendor might clash with a Syrian over stall space, or a Christian monk scowl at a pagan's wine jug. Constantinople's street food tells us who its people were, not just eaters, but hustlers, dreamers, and survivors in a city that never stood still. Their skewers were a testament to ingenuity, their dips a nod to distant lands. Their markets were a stage where East met West, and every bite was a story of trade, faith, and grit. These weren't people who ate for glory. They ate to live, to connect, to thrive in a world where every day was a hustle. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact: archaeological digs in Constantinople, like those near the Theodosian walls, reveal fish bones, olive pits, and clay ovens, confirming the city's reliance on street food. Byzantine texts, like the Book of the Eparch, regulate market vendors, detailing prices for bread and fish. Alt detail some vendors sold fried locusts, crunchy and cheap, a snack that sounds like a dare but was a hit with sailors. The Strategikon, a military manual, mentions soldiers eating street skewers, showing food's role in urban life. Historiens débattent Constantinople's food culture. Some say its diversity made it a culinary hub, blending flavors no other city could match. Others argue its reliance on imports left it vulnerable to sieges or trade disruptions. Either way, its street food was a mirror of its world. Vibrant, chaotic, and endlessly inventive. So, here you are, back in your modern world. The fans hum, a faint echo of Constantinople's markets. The city's street food wasn't fancy, but it was real. A tale of spice, smoke, and the kind of creativity that turns a skewer into a story. You think your food truck's a treat? Try grilling fish in a Byzantine alley or selling yogurt to a crowd of traders. These people ate to live, and their markets fed an empire, one bite at a time. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Would you munch a locust or slurp a mussel from the Bosphorus? Drop a comment with the best street food you've tried, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these markets richer. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more. And join us next time as we head to the serene temples of ancient India, where food was a path to the divine. For now, savor your snack and dream of Constantinople's smoky streets. Before we sink into tonight's serene tale, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. But only if you're savoring these historical flavors. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, what time it is there, and the most comforting vegetarian meal you've ever had. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the globe to taste these ancient stories. Turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's step into the sacred groves of ancient India. Part 8. Indian Temples, Spiritual Sustenance. The smoky bustle of Constantinople's markets fades. The clang of coins, replaced by the soft chant of mantras and the rustle of banyan leaves. You're now in a temple complex in ancient India, around 200 BCE, standing beneath a carved stone stupa that glows in the monsoon's afterglow. The air is thick with sandalwood incense, the hum of monks in saffron robes, and the faint aroma of simmering rice. You're a pilgrim, maybe a merchant seeking blessings, maybe a villager offering a bowl of lentils to the gods. Your stomach's gently rumbling, but this isn't about indulgence. Food here is sacred, a bridge to the divine, shared with humility and purpose. Welcome to the temples of ancient India, where every meal was a prayer, every bite a step toward enlightenment. Ancient India, from the Ganges plains to the Deccan plateau, was a land of spiritual ferment, where Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism shaped a culture that saw food as more than sustenance. Temples, whether Buddhist monasteries or Hindu shrines, were hubs of community and devotion, places where the faithful gathered to worship, learn, and eat. Food was central to this world, not as a feast for the senses, but as a gift to the gods and a means to purify the soul. The diet was largely vegetarian, rooted in ahimsa, the principle of non-violence, especially in Buddhist and Jain communities. Meals were simple, prepared with care, and shared freely, a reflection of a society that valued karma over calories. In these sacred spaces, eating wasn't just living, it was a path to the eternal. So, what's on the table? Let's start with the foundation of every temple meal. Rice, the lifeblood of the subcontinent. grown in the monsoon-soaked paddies. Rice was boiled, or steamed, into a fluffy mound. Its subtle sweetness, a canvas for spices. You'd scoop it with your fingers, the grains sticking just enough to form a perfect bite. In temples, rice was often offered plain, a symbol of purity. But cooks might mix in a pinch of turmeric or saffron for a golden hue that honored the gods. The taste, warm, comforting, like a quiet embrace from the earth itself. For variety, you'd get millet or barley, coarser grains used in porridges or flatbreads, called rotis, baked on clay griddles and torn apart by hand. Lentils were the temple's protein hero, a staple that turned a meal into a sermon. You'd find dal, a creamy stew of red or yellow lentils, simmered with cumin, coriander, and a whisper of asafoetida, a pungent resin that added depth. The dal was ladled over rice or scooped with roti, its earthy warmth filling you like a monk's chant. Other legume, like mung beans or chickpeas, showed up in stews or ground into flour for savory pancakes called dosas. Thin and crispy, served with a dollop of coconut chutney, the taste spicy, tangy, with a complexity that made you forget it was just beans. Vegetables joined the party. Seasonal picks like okra, eggplant, or spinach, stir-fried with mustard seeds or boiled into curries with tamarind for a sour kick. Dairy was a sacred gift, seen as a blessing from the cow, a holy animal in Hindu tradition. You'd get ghee, clarified butter, drizzled over rice or used to fry spices. Its nutty richness, elevating every dish to divine status. Curd, or yogurt, was a cooling side, thick and tart, sometimes mixed with cucumber or mint to soothe the heat of a chili-heavy dal. For dessert, there was kheer, a rice pudding simmered with milk, sugar, and cardamom, studded with almonds or raisins. The taste, like a lullaby in a bowl, sweet and creamy, a reward for a day of devotion. In wealthier temples, you might find laddu, golden balls of chickpea flour, ghee, and sugar, offered to deities like Ganesha and shared with pilgrims as prasad, a blessed treat. Fruit was a temple's candy, plucked from groves or offered by devotees. Mangoes, ripe and juicy, were a summer treasure. Their golden flesh, a burst of sweetness that felt like a gift from Indra. Bananas, soft and creamy, were sliced into offerings or eaten as a quick snack by monks. Pomegranates, with their ruby seeds, symbolized fertility and were scattered over rice as a blessing. The taste, like the jungle itself, vibrant and fleeting, a reminder of nature's generosity. Even simple tamarind, sour and sticky, was chewed raw or mixed into chutneys. Its tang, a wake-up call for your taste buds. Drinks were modest, but meaningful. Water was the mainstay, drawn from temple wells and served in clay cups. Cool and pure, a nod to the sacred rivers. For something special, you'd get buttermilk, churned fresh and spiced with cumin or curry leaves. Its frothy tang, a relief from the midday heat. In Buddhist monasteries, herbal teas brewed from tulsi or ginger were sipped for health and focus. Their earthy warmth, a companion to meditation. On festival days, there might be sugarcane juice, pressed from stalks and served chilled. Its raw sweetness, a rare treat that made kids grin and monks sigh. The taste, like liquid sunshine, simple but unforgettable. The real beauty of temple food was its purpose. Meals were prepared in communal kitchens, orbuchanalayas, by monks, nuns, or devoted volunteers, their hands moving with reverence. Every step, from washing rice to stirring dal, was a ritual, often accompanied by prayers or chants. Food was first offered to the gods, placed before statues of Vishnu, Shiva, or the Buddha. A portion burned in a fire or set aside as prasad. Pilgrims and the poor were fed freely. A practice called anadana, or gift of food, seen as a path to good karma. You'd sit cross-legged on the temple floor, a banana leaf as your plate, sharing rice and dal with strangers. The act of eating a bond that transcended caste or wealth. Festivals turned these meals into celebrations. During Diwali, or the Buddha's birthday, temples served feasts of kheer, laddu, and spiced rice, the air alive with bells and laughter. Monks distributed food to thousands, a reminder that generosity was as holy as prayer. Yet simplicity was key, even in abundance. The lesson was clear. Food was a clear path to focus on the divine, not the ego. Jain temples took this further, with monks eating only what was offered, sometimes fasting for days to purify their souls. Eating wasn't just nourishment. It was a meditation, a way to align body and spirit with the universe's rhythm. Let's not gloss over the challenges. Though, temple life was austere, and food was often scarce for the poorest pilgrims, who relied on charity to eat at all. Spoilage was a constant threat in the humid climate, and a bad monsoon could wipe out rice crops, leaving even temples struggling. Ingredients were limited. Spices were a luxury, and the repetitive diet of rice and dal could wear thin. For monks, strict rules governed eating. No meals after noon for Buddhists. No root vegetables for Jains to avoid harming tiny creatures. These restrictions were spiritual, but they made hunger a familiar companion, a test of faith in a world where the gods didn't always provide. The temple's food tells us who ancient Indians were. Not just eaters, but seekers who turned rice into rituals and lentils into love. Their vegetarian meals were a testament to compassion. Their prasad, a bridge between human and divine. Their communal kitchens were a quiet rebellion against division, a place where a king and a beggar could share a leaf of rice. These weren't people who ate for pleasure. They ate to live, to worship, to weave a tapestry of faith that still holds strong. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact texts, like the Arthashastra and Buddhist Vinaya, describe temple kitchens, listing rice, lentils, and ghee as staples. Cave paintings at Ajanta show monks eating simple meals, while inscriptions at Sanchi detail anadana practices. Odd detail: some temples served betel leaves, chewed with lime paste and nuts, a post-meal treat that doubled as a breath freshener. The Rigveda mentions kheer as an offering, tying food to worship as early as 1500 BCE. Historians debate the impact of India's temple food. Some say its vegetarian ethos shaped a culture of non-violence, influencing global diets. Others argue its reliance on charity reinforced social hierarchies, with the poor dependent on the pious. Either way, its food was a mirror of its world, humble, sacred, and deeply communal. So, here you are, back in your modern world. The fans hum, a faint echo of a temple's chants. India's temple food wasn't lavish, but it was real. A story of faith, generosity, and the kind of ingenuity that turns lentils into enlightenment. You think your vegan meal's a choice? Try cooking for gods and pilgrims with nothing but rice and a prayer. These people ate to live, and their temples fed souls, one leaf at a time. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Would you savor a laddu or sip tulsi tea? Drop a comment with the most comforting vegetarian meal you've had, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these rituals richer. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more, and join us next time as we head to the disciplined tables of Japan's samurai, where every bite was a vow. For now, savor your snack and dream of India's sacred groves. Before we settle into tonight's disciplined tale, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. But only if you're relishing these historical bites. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, what time it is there, and the most minimalist meal you've ever eaten. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from around the globe to savor these ancient stories. Turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's step into the austere world of Japan's samurai. Part 9. Samurai's Table. Discipline in Ancient Japan. The sandalwood haze of India's temples fades, the chant of mantras giving way to the sharp clack of wooden swords and the rustle of cherry blossoms. You're now in a fortified estate in Japan, around 1100 CE, kneeling on a tatami mat in a room of sliding shoji screens. A katana rests by your side, its blade catching the flicker of a lone oil lamp. You're a samurai, a warrior bound by bushido. Your life a balance of loyalty, honor, and the ever-present shadow of battle. Your stomach's quietly rumbling. But this isn't a feast to indulge in. Food here is fuel, a ritual as precise as your sword forms, meant to sharpen body and mind for the fight ahead. Welcome to the samurai's table, where every bite was a vow, every meal a meditation. On duty, Japan in the Heian and Kamakura periods was a land of contrasts, a courtly world of poetry and silk in Kyoto, shadowed by the rise of warrior clans in the provinces. The samurai, an emerging class of martial elite, lived by a code that prized discipline over decadence. Their food reflected this. Simple, portable, and practical, designed to sustain long campaigns or sudden duels. Unlike the lavish banquets of Babylon or Rome, samurai meals were austere, a reflection of a culture that saw restraint as strength. Yet there was beauty in this simplicity, a zen-like focus that turned rice into resolve and tea into tranquility. For the samurai, eating wasn't just survival, it was a way to embody the way of the warrior. So, what's on the menu? Let's start with the heart of every samurai meal. Rice, the soul of Japan's fields, grown in terraced paddies. Rice was boiled or steamed into sticky, glistening grains, served in lacquered bowls with the reverence of a temple offering. You'd eat it plain, its mild sweetness, a quiet comfort, or shaped into onigiri, rice balls wrapped in seaweed, or pressed with a pinch of salt. Onigiri were the samurai's field ration, compact and durable, tucked into a bamboo pouch for a campaign. The taste clean, heavy, like a deep breath in food form, filling you without dulling your edge. For variety, you might get millet or barley, boiled into porridge for lean times. But rice was king, a symbol of life itself. Protein came next, but meat was rare, frowned upon by Buddhist teachings that dominated the era. Fish was the go-to. Mackerel, sardines, or salmon, caught in Japan's rivers or seas. You'd grill them over charcoal, the skin crisping under a glaze of soy sauce, or dry them into salty, chewy strips that lasted weeks, that taste briny, smoky, with a fishy punch that woke you up like a morning cater. For special occasions, you might get freshwater ale, roasted until tender and brushed with a sweet salty sauce. A rare treat that felt like a reward for surviving another duel. Tofu, made from soybeans, was a newer addition. Boiled or fried into cubes, its mild creaminess, a quiet nod to the monk's influence. Vegetables were a samurai's sidekick, foraged or grown in small plots. Pickled radish, or daikon, was a staple, its sharp crunch a counterpoint to rice's softness. You'd find bamboo shoots, boiled to a tender snap, or wild greens like fern fronds, blanched and dressed with sesame paste. Miso soup was a daily ritual, a steaming bowl of fermented soybean paste mixed with dashi broth, bobbing with seaweed or tofu cubes. The taste, savory, umami-rich, like a warm hug from the sea, grounding you before a day of training or battle. Seasonal mushrooms, like shiitake, were simmered in broth or grilled, their earthy depth a reminder of the forest's quiet power. Fruit was sparse, more a treat than a staple. Persimmons, tart and orange, were dried into chewy slices, their sweetness a rare break from the savory grind. Plums, pickled as yumaboshi, were a samurai favorite, tucked into onigiri for a sour jolt that kept you alert. The taste like a lemon with an attitude, puckering your mouth but sharpening your focus. Perfect for a warrior who couldn't afford to doze off. Fresh apples or pears were a luxury, bartered from merchants or plucked from a lord's orchard. Their crisp juiciness, a fleeting escape from duty. Drinks were as disciplined as the food. Water was the default, drawn from mountain springs and sipped from bamboo ladles. Its purity, a mirror of the samurai's ideal. Tea, green and bitter, was gaining ground, especially in Zen monasteries, where monks drank it to stay awake during meditation. You'd whisk matcha powder into frothy tea, its grassy astringency, a wake-up call for mind and soul. For warriors, sake was the sacred elixir, rice wine, brewed with care, and offered to Shinto gods before battles. Sake was clear, potent, and served warm in tiny cups, its smooth warmth loosening tongues at rare feasts, the taste like a soft fire, sweet, then sharp, a reminder that even a samurai could savor a moment's peace. The samurai's meals were steeped in ritual, as precise as their swordplay. You'd eat seated on the floor, chopsticks in hand, every movement deliberate. Food was served in small portions, arranged in lacquered trays for balance, a nod to the harmony of yin and yang. Before eating, you'd offer thanks to the gods or ancestors, a quiet prayer for strength. Meals were often solitary, eaten in silence to focus the mind. But gatherings with fellow warriors turned food into a bond. Picture a war camp, samurai kneeling around a fire, sharing onigiri and sake, their laughter mingling with the crackle of flames. These moments were rare, a chance to affirm loyalty before the next battle claimed a friend. Feasts were reserved for victories or alliances, hosted by a daimyo in a castle's great hall. You'd find richer fare, perhaps venison or wild boar, hunted in defiance of Buddhist taboos, roasted and served with miso-glazed vegetables. Sake flowed freely, poured by attendants as warriors toasted their lord or recounted duels. Yet even these feasts were restrained. Excess was a weakness, and a samurai who overate risked disgrace. The meal was a mirror of Bushido. Honor in every bite, discipline in every sip. Food wasn't indulgence. It was preparation, a way to steel the body for a life where death was always one blade away. Let's not idealize. Though, samurai life was grueling, and food was often scarce, especially on campaign. A bad harvest could starve a province, leaving even warriors chewing millet husks or dried seaweed. Fish spoiled fast without ice, and pickling didn't always mask the funk. The diet was monotonous, rice, miso, fish. Repeat, with little variety to break the grind. For lower-ranking samurai, meals were barely better than peasants. A bowl of porridge and a prayer for better days. Even zaka, sacred as it was meant, could lead to drunken brawls, a lapse in discipline that could cost a head. And while Bushido preached honor, some samurai raided villages for food, their hunger stronger than their code. The samurai's food tells us who they were. Warriors who turned simplicity into strength, rice into resolve. Their onigiri was a lesson in portability. Their miso, a ritual of resilience. Their rare feasts were a quiet defiance of death, a moment to laugh before the blade fell. These weren't people who ate for pleasure. They ate to live, to serve, to carve their names into history's scroll. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact, Kamakura-era texts, like the Hojoki, mention rice, fish, and miso as warrior staples, while archaeological digs at castle sites reveal rice stores and fish bones. The Taiheki Chronicle describes samurai eating onigiri before battles, confirming its role as field food. Odd detail, some samurai chewed dried squid as a snack. Its leathery texture, a test of jaw strength. The Shoku Nihongi records sake offerings at Shinto shrines, tying it to warrior rituals as early as 700 CE. Historians debate the samurai diet's impact. Some say its simplicity gave warriors endurance, outlasting enemies who needed lavish supplies. Others argue its lack of variety weakened health, with records showing scurvy in long campaigns. Either way, their food was a mirror of their world. Austere, disciplined, and fiercely focused. So, here you are, back in your modern world. The fans hum, a faint echo of a katana's whisper. The samurai's food wasn't lavish, but it was real. A tale of duty, ritual, and the kind of grit that turns rice into courage. You think your meal prep's tough? Try eating onigiri on a battlefield or sipping sake with death at your door. These people ate to live, and their tables forged a legend, one bowl at a time. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Would you chew umeboshi or sip warm sake? Drop a comment with the most minimalist meal you've eaten, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these rituals richer. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more. And join us next time as we trek the Silk Road's dusty trails, where food was a language of trade and trust. For now, savor your snack and dream of Japan's cherry blossom nights. Before we embark on tonight's journey, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. But only if you're savoring these historical bites. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, what time it is there, and the most exotic food you've ever tried. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from around the globe to taste these ancient tales. Turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's hit the dusty trails of the Silk Road. Part 10. Silk Road's Caravans. Food on the move. The cherry blossom calm of Japan's samurai estates fades. The clack of katanas, replaced by the creak of camel hooves and the jingle of caravan bells. You're now on the Silk Road, around 200 CE, trudging across a windswept desert where the Taklamakan's dunes stretch like an ocean of sand. The sun blisters your neck. Your pack weighs heavy with spices or silk, and your water skin's dangerously light. You're a trader, maybe from Chang'an, maybe from Samarkand, guiding a string of camels toward a distant oasis. Your stomach's growling, but there's no market stall or temple kitchen here. Just what you can carry or barter at the next caravanserai. Welcome to the Silk Road's table, where food was a currency, a lifeline, and a story of cultures colliding in every bite. The Silk Road wasn't a single path. but a web of roots stretching from China's Han Dynasty to Rome's empire, linking East Asia, Central Asia, Persia, India, and beyond. It carried silk, yada, and ideas. But food was its quiet hero, fueling traders, pilgrims, and nomads across deserts, mountains, and steppes. This wasn't a world of lavish feasts or disciplined rituals, but one of survival and exchange, where a sack of dried fruit or a skewer of lamb could seal a deal or save a life. The cuisine was a mosaic, blending Chinese noodles, Persian spices, Indian curries, and stepped jerky into a global pantry that fed body and soul. Every meal was a map, tracing the journey of a trader's dreams. So, what's in your pack? Let's start with the universal fuel. Bread, the Silk Road's answer to hunger. In Central Asia, you'd carry naan, a flatbread baked in tandoor ovens, its crust blistered and chewy, perfect for tearing apart with dusty hands. You'd wrap it around a chunk of cheese or dip it in a shared bowl of stew, the nutty flavor soaking up every drop. In China, you might have bing, a denser pancake fried on griddles, sometimes stuffed with scallions or meat scraps. For long treks, the bread was dried into rock-hard discs, soaked in tea or broth to soften. The taste plain, hearty, like a handshake from the earth, keeping you grounded when the horizon blurred. Meat was a precious cargo, especially in the deserts where fresh kills were rare. Lamb and goat were favorites, slaughtered at oases and roasted over dung fires, the fat sizzling into the sand. You'd get kebabs, chunks of meat skewered with onions, marinated in yogurt or pomegranate juice for a tangy kick. The taste, smoky, tender, with a spice that woke you from the trail's monotony. For portability, meat was dried into jerky, tough strips of mutton or horse, chewed slowly to make them last. In Mongol camps, you might find borts, air-dried beef ground into powder, mixed with water for a grim but calorie-packed slurry. It wasn't gourmet, but when you're freezing in the Gobi, it was a hug in your mouth. Grains and legumes were the caravan's backbone, light enough to carry, filling enough to share. You'd have rice from China, boiled into sticky clumps, or fried with scraps of meat and wild leeks. In Persia, barley was simmered into soups, thick with lentils and flavored with turmeric or cumin. India sent chickpeas, roasted as a crunchy snack or stewed into chana masala, a spicy mix that burned your tongue but warmed your bones. The taste earthy, complex, like a spice market in a bowl. Each bite a reminder of the hands that traded it. For quick meals, you'd grind grains into flour for dumplings, steamed over campfires, their doughy warmth a small miracle in the cold. Fruit was the Silk Road's candy, a burst of sweetness in a world of dust. Dried apricots from Samarkand were a trader's gold, chewy and tart, packed in leather sacks for months-long treks. You'd suck on one, the sugar hitting like a memory of home. Dates from Persia, sticky and caramel-like, were bartered for silk or shared to seal a deal. In China, you might get dried persimmons, their orange flesh, a rare treat that felt like stealing from an emperor's orchard. The taste like dessert with a passport, sweet and fleeting, a reward for surviving another pass. Fresh fruit, like grapes or melons, was a caravanserai luxury, eaten greedily before it spoiled. Drinks were as vital as food, and tea was the Silk Road's lifeblood. In China, you'd sip green tea, its bitter warmth steadying your nerves after a bandit scare. In Central Asia, Black tea was brewed strong, mixed with mare's milk or butter for a calorie boost. A Mongol trick that tasted like a savory soup. The taste grassy, Einrich, like a campfire in a cup, keeping you alert through endless dunes. Water was precious, carried in goatskins and rationed like gold. In Persia, you might get sharbat, a sweet syrup of rosewater and pomegranate, diluted in water for a floral sip that felt like a poem. Wine, from Sogdian vineyards, was a trader's vice, poured at oases to toast a safe crossing. Its fruity tang, a brief escape from the trail. The real magic was the caravanserai, the Silk Road's pit stops, where food became a language. Picture a mud brick inn, its courtyard packed with camels, traders, and monks, the air thick with smoke and stories. You'd find stalls serving lagman, hand-pulled noodles from China, tossed with lamb and cumin, a dish that followed traders west, or plov, a Central Asian rice pilaf studded with carrots, raisin, and mutton, cooked in giant cauldrons over open fires. The taste, like a warm blanket, savory and sweet, a meal that said you made it. Vendors offered yogurt drinks, spiced with mint, or fermented mare's milk, a nod to the steppe nomads who guarded the routes. Meals were shared on communal mats. Persian poets swapping tales with Chinese scribes, their hands greasy from the same skewer. Food wasn't just sustenance. It was trade. A sack of Indian pepper could buy a camel. A jar of Chinese soy sauce, a bolt of silk. Recipes traveled as fast as goods. Dumplings from Chang'an showed up in Samarkand. Persian saffron-spiced Indian curries. Traders were chefs by necessity, learning to cook over campfires, bartering spices for survival. A Sogdian merchant might teach a Turkic herder to steam buns, while a Buddhist monk shared dal recipes with a Zoroastrian priest. These exchanges shaped cuisines, laying the roots for dishes we love today. From ramen to pilaf to samosas, every bite was a deal, a story, a step toward a connected world. Let's not sugarcoat it. Though, the Silk Road was brutal, and food was a constant gamble. Spoilage was a killer. Dried meat could turn rancid. Grain could mold in a storm. Water sources were scarce, often fouled by caravans or bandits. Starvation was a real threat. A delayed caravan or a harsh winter could leave you chewing leather or boiling grass. Traders faced robbery, disease, and betrayal. A bad deal could cost your food as fast as your life. Cultural clashes sparked tension. A Chinese trader might scoff at Mongol milk tea, a Persian sneer at stepiyaki, and while the Silk Road was a melting pot, it was also a divide, where wealthier merchants ate plov while porters gnawed stale bread. The Silk Road's food tells us who its people were. Not just traders, but bridge builders who turned hunger into history. Their naan was a lesson in survival, their plover hymn to shared fires. Their caravanserais were a stage where cultures danced, and every bite was a thread in a global tapestry. These weren't people who ate for comfort. They ate to live, to connect, to carry their dreams across deserts. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact archaeological sites like Dunhuang and Turfan reveal dried fruits, grain sacks, and cooking pots, confirming the Silk Road's portable diet. Texts like Marco Polo's accounts, though later, describe plov and noodles, tying them to trade routes. Odd detail: some traders ate camel hump fat, a greasy delicacy that sounds like a survival stunt but packed calories. The Sutra of the Thousand Buddhas mentions monks eating rice and lentils, showing food's role in spreading faith. Historians debate the Silk Road's culinary legacy. Some say its food exchanges created the first global cuisine, shaping diets from Beijing to Byzantium. Others argue its reliance on trade made it fragile. A drought or war could starve a route. Either way, its food was a mirror of its world. Diverse, precarious, and endlessly inventive. So, here you are, back in your modern world. The fans hum, a faint echo of caravan bells. The Silk Road's food wasn't lavish, but it was real. A saga of spice, survival, and the kind of grit that turns a dumpling into a deal. You think your takeout's exotic? Try bartering apricots for your life, or cooking plov in a sandstorm. These people ate to live, and their caravans fed a world. One skewer at a time. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Would you chew borts or sip butter tea? Drop a comment with the most exotic food you've tried, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these journeys richer. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more. And join us next time as we venture to the Maya's jungles, where food was a gift from the gods. For now, savor your snack and dream of the Silk Road's endless dunes. Before we plunge into tonight's lush tale, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. But only if you're savoring these historical flavors. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, what time it is there, and the most unusual ingredient you've ever cooked with. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from around the globe to taste these ancient stories. Turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's venture into the steamy jungles of the Maya. Part 11, Maya's Bounty, Jungle Feasts. The dusty trails of the Silk Road vanish. The jingle of caravan bells swallowed by the screech of parrots and the drip of rainforest dew. You're now in a Maya city, around 600 CE. Standing in the shadow of a limestone pyramid piercing the Yucatan's green canopy, the air is heavy, thick with humidity and the scent of roasting corn. You're a Maya commoner. Maybe a farmer tending milpa fields. Maybe a craftsman shaping obsidian blades. Your stomach's rumbling, and dinner waits in a thatched hut. A meal born from the jungle's gifts and the gods' demands. No silk or spices here, just the earthy bounty of a land where every bite honors the maize god. Welcome to the Maya's table, where food was a prayer, a labor, and a taste of the divine. The Maya civilization, sprawling across modern-day Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize, was a marvel of stone cities, star charts, and sacred ball courts. Their world was the jungle, a lush but unforgiving realm where survival meant mastering the land's rhythms. Food was at the heart of it all, a gift from gods like Yum-Cax, who demanded blood and reverence in return. The Maya diet was rooted in maize, a crop so sacred it was woven into their creation myths. But it was far from monotonous. They coaxed flavors from the forest, blending corn, beans, and cacao into meals that fueled farmers, priests, and kings. Eating wasn't just sustenance, it was a ritual, a way to align with the cosmos and keep the gods fed. So, what's cooking? Let's start with the soul of every Maya meal. Maize, the golden grain that was both food and deity. Grown in milpa fields, maize was ground into masa, a dough shaped into tamales or tortillas. Tamales were the Maya's masterpiece. Masa stuffed with beans, chili, or scraps of turkey, wrapped in banana leaves, and steamed until soft. You'd peel back the leaf, the steam carrying a sweet, earthy aroma, and bite into a tender, spicy bundle that felt like a gift from the earth. Tortillas, flat and griddled on clay comals, were simpler, torn apart to scoop up stews or folded with a pinch of salt. The taste warm, nottu, like a handshake from the gods, filling you with the jungle's pulse. Beans were maize's partner, a protein-packed staple that made every meal a balance. Black or red beans were boiled with epazote, apung and herb, into a thick stew, sometimes spiked with chili for heat. You'd ladle it over tortillas, or mix it with maize for a one-pot meal that stuck to your ribs. Squash, the milpa's third pillar, added sweetness. Its flesh roasted or boiled into soups with onions or wild greens. The taste hearty, savoury, with a chili kick that woke your senses like a jaguar's growl. For variety, you'd get amaranth or chia, tiny seeds, ground into porridge or pressed into cakes. Their nutty crunch, a quick snack for a day in the fields. Protein came from the jungle's edges, not fast herds. Turkey and deer were the big prizes, hunted with blowguns or traps. Their meat roasted over fires or stewed with achiote, a red seed that gave a peppery tang. You'd savour the gamey richness, a rare treat for commoners, often reserved for festivals or elite feasts. Dogs, bred for food, were another option, fattened on maize and roasted until tender. Their flavour, a mix of pork and moral compromise. Fish, like catfish from cenote pools, were grilled or dried. Their salty bite, a taste of the underworld. For the adventurous, there were iguanas or armadillos, roasted whole. Their chewy meat, a test of hunger over squeamishness. The taste wild, smoky, a reminder that the jungle gave and took in equal measure. Vegetables and fruits were the Maya's palate, a riot of colours from the forest. Chilies, from mild to face-melting, were in everything, dried into powders or tossed fresh into salsas with tomatoes and cilantro. You dip a tortilla in salsa, the heat hitting like a sacred ball game, leaving you gasping but grinning. Avocados, creamy and rich, were mashed into guacamole's ancestor, a cooling side for spicy stews. Root crops like manioc or sweet potatoes were roasted, their starchy sweetness, a quiet comfort. Fruits were a gift, papaya and guava eaten fresh, their juice dripping down your chin. Or pineapple, tart and golden, a burst of sunshine in the shade. The taste, like the jungle itself, vibrant and alive. Each bite a hymn to the land. The Maya's secret weapon was cacao, not the sweet chocolate of today, but a bitter elixir of the gods. Cocoa beans were ground with chili or vanilla, mixed with water, and frothed into a thick drink. Served in painted cups at rituals or feasts. You'd sip it slowly, the bitter heat curling through you like a priest's chant. A drink that felt like communion with the divine. The taste like coffee with a bad attitude. Sharp and intense. A jolt that made you feel like you could wrestle a jaguar. Cacao was currency too. Beans traded like coins. A reminder that this was no mere drink. It was power, wealth, and sacred fire in liquid form. Drinks were sparse beyond cacao. Water was the mainstay, drawn from cenotes or rivers, sipped from gourds with a prayer for purity. For festivals, you might get balché, a fermented drink made from tree bark and honey, mildly alcoholic and earthy, offered to the gods before humans dared a sip. The taste like a forest's revenge, bitter and strange, but it connected you to the spirits. Pulque, a milky agave brew, was rarer, its sour fizz a treat for elite gatherings. Sipped to honour the rain god, Tlaloc. These drinks weren't for fun, they were rituals, a way to toast the gods who kept the rains coming and the maize growing. Eating was a communal act. Steeped in reverence, families gathered on woven mats, sharing tamales and beans from clay pots, their hands brushing as they passed tortillas. Meals were simple for commoners, eaten at dawn or dusk to bookend a day in the fields. In cities like Tikal, the markets buzzed with vendors selling tamales or roasted squash. But most food came from home plots or bartered goods. Festivals were the exception, when priests distributed maize cakes or turkey stew. The community feasting under the pyramid's gaze, these meals were offerings as much as nourishment, a portion always set aside for the gods. Burned in censers or buried in sacred ground, rituals took food to another level. Before planting, farmers offered maize dough to yum karks, their blood mixed with the soil to ensure a harvest. Elite feasts, held in palace courtyards, featured cacao drinks and deer haunches, served to nobles in painted vessels, while musicians played bone flutes. Human sacrifice, grim but real, sometimes included ritual cannibalism, a symbolic act to absorb an enemy's strength. Though it was rare and reserved for high stakes, food was a language, speaking of gratitude, power, and the delicate balance between human and divine. Every bite was a reminder that the gods watched and the jungle never slept. Let's not gloss over the struggles. Jungle life was harsh, and food was never guaranteed. Droughts could kill maize crops, leaving villagers to ration seeds or eat bitter roots. Pests, from monkeys to locusts, raided fields, and spoilage was a constant threat in the humid heat. Commoners ate simply maize and beans day after day, with meat a distant dream. Ibn cacao, sacred as it was mostly for the elite, leaving farmers with water and grit. Disease, like dysentery from bad water, stalked every meal, and malnutrition was a shadow for the poorest. The Mayas' myths promised abundance, but their reality was a daily fight against the forest's whims. The Mayas' food tells us who they were, not just farmers, but poets of the jungle who turned maize into myths and cacao into currency. Their tamales were a testament to ingenuity, their salsas a hymn to the land's fire. Their rituals were a quiet defiance of drought and death, a way to say, we'll feed the gods and live. These weren't people who ate for pleasure. They ate to survive, to worship, to carve a legacy in stone and soil. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact: archaeological sites like Tikal and Copan reveal maize kernels, cacao residuis, and tamale molds, confirming their diet's core. Maya glyphs and murals, like those at Calakmul, depict feasts and offerings, tying food to ritual, or detail some Maya otter snails, plucked from jungle streams, boiled into a chewy snack that sounds like a dare. The Popol Vuh, the Maya creation epic, calls humans people of maize, cementing its sacred role. Historians debate the Maya diet's sustainability. Some say their milpa system, rotating crops, supported denser cities for centuries. Others argue deforestation and drought-strained resources, leading to collapses. Either way, their food was a mirror of their world. Sacred, precarious, and vibrant. So, the fans hum, a faint echo of jungle whispers. The Mayas' food wasn't grand, but it was real. A saga of maize, sweat, and the kind of faith that turns a seed into a prayer. You think your meal's unique? Try steaming tamales for a deity, or drinking cacao hotter than the sun. These people ate to live, and their feasts fed the gods. One tortilla at a time. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Would you sip bitter cacao or wrestle an iguana for dinner? Drop a comment with the most unusual ingredient you've cooked with, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these jungles richer. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more. And join us next time as we climb the Andes to the Inca's golden fields, where potatoes ruled supreme. For now, savor your snack and dream of the Maya's emerald heart. Before we ascend into tonight's Highland tale, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. But only if you're relishing these historical flavors. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, what time it is there, and the most hearty root vegetable dish you've ever tried. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the globe to taste these ancient stories. Turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's climb the rugged peaks of the Andes. Part 12, Inca's Harvest, Gold of the Andes. The humid jungles of the Maya dissolve, their emerald canopy giving way to the stark, windswept heights of the Andes. You're now in Cusco, the heart of the Inca Empire, around 1450 CE. Standing on a stone terrace carved into a mountainside, the air is thin, sharp with the chill of altitude and the scent of roasting corn. You're an Inca, perhaps a farmer tending potato fields, perhaps a noble preparing for a festival to honor Inti, the sun god. Your stomach's rumbling, and dinner awaits. A meal drawn from the rugged earth and offered to the heavens. No cacao or silk here, just the hardy bounty of a land where every crop is a miracle of human will. Welcome to the Inca's table, where food was a triumph, a ritual, and a gift from the mountains. The Inca Empire, stretching from modern-day Ecuador to Chile, was a marvel of engineering and devotion, its stone cities and terraced fields defying the Andes' harsh terrain. Food was the empire's engine, sustaining armies, priests, and a vast network of roads that tied 1,000,000 souls together. The Inca mastered agriculture, turning rocky slopes into gardens of maize, potatoes, and quinoa, crops that fed both body and spirit. Their diet was a balance of necessity and reverence, with every harvest tied to the sun's cycle and the gods' favor. Eating wasn't just survival, it was a pact with the divine, a way to keep the world turning under Inti's golden gaze. So, what's on the plate? Let's start with the Andes' unsung hero, the potato. A crop so vital, it was practically a deity. The Inca grew thousands of varieties, from tiny purple tubers to starchy whites, each suited to a different altitude or soil. You'd boil them in clay pots, their earthy sweetness bursting with every bite, or roast them in embers for a smoky crunch. For long storage, potatoes were freeze-dried into chuño, left to freeze at night and dry in the sun, turning into hard, light nuggets that lasted years. You'd soak chuño in water, stew it with herbs, and eat a meal that tasted like the mountain itself, chewy and nutty. A lifeline in lean times, maize was the Inca's other staple, less sacred than in Maya lands, but still a gift from the gods. Grown in lower valleys, it was boiled into kernels or ground into flour for tamales. Softer than Maya versions, stuffed with beans or guinea pig meat, you'd unwrap on the steam rising like a prayer, and savor the sweet, doughy warmth. Flatbreads, made from maize or quinoa, were baked on hot stones, their crusty edges perfect for scooping up stews. The taste, like sunshine trapped in grain, filling you with the strength to climb another terrace or carry a message across the empire. Protein was a prize, and the Inca had unique sources. Guinea pigs, or kai, were a household staple, raised in homes and fattened on vegetable scraps. You'd roast them whole over a fire, the skin crackling, the meat tender and slightly gamey, like a cross between chicken and rabbit, the taste rich, fatu, a rare treat that made you feel like a lord for a night. Llamas and alpacas, vital for wool and transport, were rarely slaughtered. But when they were, their meat was dried into charqui, the ancestor of jerky, or stewed with peppers. Fish, like anchovies from the Pacific coast, were dried or smoked, their salty bite a trade good carried to the highlands. For the bold, there were frogs or grubs, roasted for a crunchy, nutty snack that tested your jungle grit. Vegetables and legumes brought colour to the plate. Beans, black or lima, were boiled into stews with aji peppers. Their mild heat, a nod to the Incas' love of spice. Quinoa, tiny protein-packed seeds, was simmered into soups or ground into flour. Its nutty flavour, a quiet powerhouse. Root crops like oca or mashua, tart and starchy, were roasted or boiled, their brightness cutting through meat's richness. Wild greens, like wakate, added a minty zing to stews or salsas, the taste like the Andes in a bowl, earthy and vibrant, each bite a reminder of the terraces that fed an empire. Fruit was a highland luxury, grown in warmer valleys or traded from the Amazon's edge. Chirimoya, creamy and sweet, was eaten fresh, its custard-like flesh a rare delight. Lucuma, with its maple-like flavour, was dried into powder for desserts or drinks. Peppers, from mild to fiery, were dried into sauces, their heat a spark that woke your soul, the taste like a mountain breeze, sweet then sharp, a fleeting gift from lands below the peaks. Even coca leaves, chewed with lime for energy, were a snack of sorts, their bitter buzz keeping runners speeding along Inca roads. The Incas' drink of choice was chicha, a fermented maize beer that was both food and offering, brewed by women. Chicha started with chewed maize, the saliva kick-starting fermentation, then boiled with water into a cloudy tong brew. You'd sip it from wooden cups, its mild alcohol and grainy sweetness, warming you like a hearth, the taste like a sour boozy porridge. Not exactly a party drink, but it fueled festivals and kept workers hauling stones. Elite chicha was clearer, flavoured with berries or herbs, served in silver keras cups to honour Inti. Water, drawn from mountain springs, was the daily staple, sipped with gratitude for the apus. Mountain spirits, who guarded the flow. Eating was a communal act, woven with ritual. Families shared meals on woven mats, passing pots of chuño stew or roasted cuy, their hands brushing in quiet unity. Commoners ate simply, maize and potatoes at every meal, with meat a festival treat. In cities like Cusco, markets offered tamales or grilled fish, but most food came from home plots or state storehouses, a system of labor taxes that fed armies and priests. Festivals, like Inti Raymi, were the grand stage, when nobles hosted feasts with chicha rivers and llama sacrifices, the community eating to thank the sun. Every meal began with an offering, a pinch of maize or a splash of chicha spilled for Pachamama, the Earth Mother, ensuring her favour. Elite feasts were a spectacle, held in sunlit courtyards with stone benches. Nobles dined on alpaca steaks, quinoa, pilaf, and lucuma sweets, served by attendants in woven tunics. Chicha flowed from golden urns, and priests chanted to Inti, their voices rising with the smoke of offerings. These meals were power, reinforcing the emperor's divine rule. and the empire's unity. For commoners, such feasts were rare, but the Inca's redistribution meant even farmers got meat or chicha during festivals, a taste of the empire's wealth. Food was a contract, binding people to gods and each other, a reminder that no one survived the Andes alone. Let's not overlook the hardships. Though the Andes were brutal, and food was a constant struggle. Frosts or droughts could kill crops, leaving storehouses bare and villages chewing coca to dull hunger. Potatoes took years to grow in high altitudes, and pests like weevils raided quinoa stores. Commoners' diets were repetitive. Chuño and maize, day in, day out, with meat, a distant dream. Chicha could sour, water sources freeze, and spoilage in the warm valleys was a threat. The elite ate well, but their feasts drained the farmers' labor, and taxes left some hungry to glorify the emperor. Even the sacred coca was a privilege, controlled by nobles, leaving commoners with grit and prayer. The Inca's food tells us who they were: engineers, worshippers, and survivors who turned stone into fields and hunger into empire. Their potatoes were a lesson in resilience, their chicha a hymn to community. Their feasts were a defiance of the Andes cold, a way to say, "We'll feed the sun and thrive." These weren't people who ate for joy. They ate to live, to honor, to build a world that still echoes in the mountains. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact: archaeological sites like Machu Picchu and Ollantaytambo reveal maize kernels, potato chuño, and chicha vats, confirming their diet's core. Spanish chronicles, like those of Garcilaso de la Vega, describe Inca feasts and farming, though tinted with bias. Odd detail: some Inca ate clay, mixed with quinoa for minerals, a gritty snack that sounds like desperation but aided health. The Huayna Capac inscriptions detail food tributes, showing the empire's vast supply chain. Historians debate the Inca diet's strength. Some say their diverse crops and storehouses sustained a vast empire without collapse. Others argue their reliance on maize and labor taxes strained resources, weakening them against Spanish conquest. Either way, their food was a mirror of their world: rugged, sacred, and fiercely inventive. So, here you are, back in your modern world. The fans hum, a faint echo of Andean winds. The Inca's food wasn't lavish, but it was real. A saga of roots, sweat, and the kind of faith that turns a potato into gold. You think your comfort food's hearty? Try freeze-drying chuño at 14,000 feet, or brewing chicha for a god. These people ate to live, and their harvests built an empire, one tuber at a time. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Would you roast a kai or sip chicha from a kero? Drop a comment with the most hearty root vegetable dish you've tried, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these mountains richer. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more. And join us next time as we roam the African savanna, where food was a warrior's strength. For now, savor your snack and dream of the Andes' golden peaks. Before we roam into tonight's rugged tale, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. But only if you're savoring these historical bites. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, what time it is there, and the most daring food you've ever tried. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from around the globe to taste these ancient stories. Turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's stride across the African savanna. Part 13: African Savanna, Maasai's Strength. The golden peaks of the Andes fade, their crisp air replaced by the dry, the earthy heat of an endless grassland. You're now on the East African savanna, around 1000 CE, standing amid a sea of acacia trees and swaying grass. the distant bellow of cattle mingling with the wind's low moan. You're a Maasai warrior, tall and lean, your red shuka cloth flapping as you lean on a spear. Your herd grazing nearby, your stomach's growling. But there's no market or kitchen here, just what your cattle provide, and the land's sparse gifts. Food is scarce, sacred, and tied to your strength as a Moran, a protector of your people. Welcome to the Maasai's table, where every meal is a test of survival, a bond with your herd, and a mark of courage. The Maasai, roaming the savannas of modern-day Kenya and Tanzania, were one of many pastoralist groups in ancient Africa, their lives woven with cattle in a land where grass was gold. Their diet was raw, shaped by the harsh realities of a semi-arid world where water was fleeting and crops were a gamble. Food wasn't about comfort, but endurance, fueling warriors, herders, and families through migrations, droughts, and raids. The Maasai saw their cattle as gifts from Enkai, their sky god, and every meal reflected this reverence, blending milk, blood, and meat into a cuisine that was as bold as their spears. Eating wasn't just living, it was a declaration of strength, a way to thrive where the savannah offered little mercy. So, what's for dinner? Let's start with the Maasai's lifeblood. Milk, drawn fresh from their zebu cows. You'd crouch by a cow's side, your hands deftly milking into a gourd. The warm liquid, frothy and rich. Milk was drunk straight, its creamy sweetness, a burst of energy, or left to ferment in the gourd for days, turning into a tangy, yogurt-like drink called kule naoto, the taste like a sour smoothie, thick and sharp, with a grassy note that tied you to the herd. Milk was a daily staple, sipped by warriors on patrol or shared with children around a fire. A food so vital it was currency, traded for beads or settled disputes. Next came blood, a sacred and shocking staple for outsiders, but a survival tool for the Maasai. You'd nick a cow's jugular with a small arrow, catching the blood in a gourd, careful not to harm the animal. The blood was drunk fresh, warm and iron-heavy, or mixed with milk for a pinkish, protein-packed brew called osapat. The taste, like a metallic milkshake, salty and intense. A jolt that made you feel invincible. Blood was a warrior's fuel, drunk before raids or during droughts when milk ran low. A way to keep strength without slaughtering the herd. It wasn't daily fare but a ritual. A reminder that cattle gave life in more ways than one. Meat was a rare prize, reserved for ceremonies or desperate times. Cattle were too precious to kill often, so you'd wait for a ritual, like a warrior's initiation. To slaughter a bull, the meat was roasted over an acacia fire, the fat sizzling into the flames, or boiled into a broth with wild herbs. You'd tear into a strip of beef, its smoky, gamey richness, a burst of joy after weeks of milk. Goats, less sacred, were eaten more often, their tougher meat grilled on skewers or stewed with fat for a greasy stew. The taste like a savanna campfire, chewy and bold, a reward for a life of constant motion. Every part was used. Organ grilled, bones cracked for marrow. Nothing wasted in a land where hunger lurked. Vegetables were scarce. As the savannah wasn't a garden, you'd forage wild greens, like pigweed or amaranth, boiled into a bitter porridge or chewed raw for vitamins. Roots, like wild yams, were dug up in lean times, roasted for a starchy bite that tasted like dirt but kept you moving. Maize, introduced later, was ground into ugali, a dense porridge eaten with broth or milk. Its bland heft a filler for empty bellies. The taste like a compromise with the land, plain but sustaining. A nod to survival over flavor. Berries, like wild figs or marula fruit, were a rare treat. Their tart sweetness, a fleeting gift from the trees. Drinks were milk and blood, but water was the true prize. Drawn from rivers or seasonal pools and carried in gourds, you'd sip it sparingly. Its muddy taste, a reminder of the savannah's stinginess. For rituals, there was honey beer, brewed from wild honey and millet, fermented in clay pots into a fizzy, sweet brew. You'd drink it at weddings or warrior ceremonies. Its light buzz, loosening laughter under the stars. The taste like a meadow in a cup, sticky and warm. A rare escape from the grind. Herbal teas, made from acacia bark or wild mint, were sipped for health. Their bitter warmth, a warrior's tonic. Eating was a communal act, steeped in respect. Families gathered around a fire, sharing gourds of milk or strips of meat. Elders served first as a nod to wisdom. Warriors ate apart during rites. Their meals of blood and beef, a bond of brotherhood, sealed with stories of raids or lion hunts. Meals were simple, often just milk or ugali, eaten quickly to return to the herd. Festivals, like Eunoto, when warriors became elders, there were feasts of roasted oxen and honey beer, the community dancing under a moonlit sky. Every meal was an offering, a splash of milk poured for Enkai, a bone left for the ancestors, ensuring their protection in a world of lions and drought. Rituals made food a bridge to the divine. Before a raid, warriors drank blood to invoke Enkai's courage, their spears raised in prayer. At initiations, young men ate raw meat, a symbol of strength, their faces painted with ochre and milk. Cattle were blessed with songs, their milk seen as a sacred trust, tying the Maasai to their god and their land. Feasts were rare but generous, uniting clans with shared plates, a reminder that survival meant solidarity. Food was a language of loyalty, a way to honor the herd that defined their world. Let's not gloss over the challenges. The savannah was merciless, and food was a daily gamble. Droughts could dry up milk, disease, kill cattle, and raids, steal herds, leaving families to chew roots or starve. Blood drinking was nutritious but risky. A bad cut could weaken a cow, and parasites lurked in untreated water. The diet was limited milk, meat, and little else, leading to deficiencies in iron or vitamins during lean years. Vegetables were a luxury, often bitter or scarce, and the Maasai's reliance on cattle made them vulnerable to environmental shifts. Warriors, despite their prestige, often went hungry. Their strength, a facade built on willpower. Women and children ate last, their portions smaller, a stark reality in a culture that prized male prowess. The Maasai's food tells us who they were: warriors, herders, and poets of the savannah who turned milk into might and blood into bonds. Their ugali was a lesson in endurance, their feasts a hymn to unity. Their rituals were a defiance of drought and death, a way to say, we'll walk the grass and live. These weren't people who ate for pleasure. They ate to survive, to honor, to carry their spears into legend. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact, ethnographic studies and oral traditions, recorded by early colonial accounts, confirm the Maasai's reliance on milk, blood, and meat. Archaeological sites in the Rift Valley reveal cattle bones and milk residues in gourds, tying their diet to pastoralism. Or detail some Maasai artetamitas, scooped from mounds and roasted for a nutty crunch. A survival snack that sounds like a dare. The Laban prophecies, oral histories, mention milk as a sacred gift, cementing its role in ritual. Historians debate the Maasai diet's resilience. Some say its high-protein focus gave warriors unmatched stamina, outlasting settled farmers. Others argue its lack of diversity weakened health, with evidence of anemia in skeletal remains. Either way, their food was a mirror of their world, raw, sacred, and fiercely defiant. So, here you are, back in your modern world. The fans hum, a faint echo of savanna winds. The Maasai's food wasn't lavish, but it was real. A saga of milk, courage, and the kind of grit that turns blood into strength. You think your protein shake's bold? Try drinking osupat under a lion's gaze or roasting goat in a drought. These people ate to live, and their herds fed a legend, one gourd at a time. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Would you sip Kule Neoto or chew termites? Drop a comment with the most daring food you've tried, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these plains richer. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more, and join us next time as we sail the Polynesian seas, where food was a voyager's map. For now, savor your snack and dream of the savannah's endless grass. Before we sail into tonight's oceanic tale, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you're relishing these historical flavors. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, what time it is there, and the most tropical dish you've ever tried. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from around the globe to taste these ancient stories. Turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's set sail across the Pacific's endless blue. Part 14. Polynesian Voyages. Food of the Pacific. The sun-scorched savanna of the Maasai fades. The bellow of cattle replaced by the rhythmic crash of waves and the creak of an outrigger canoe. You're now in the vast Pacific. Around 500 CE. Standing on the deck of a double-hulled voyaging canoe, your eyes scanning the horizon for a speck of land. The sea stretches forever, a sapphire expanse dotted with stars reflected below. You're a Polynesian navigator, a wayfinder guided by wind, waves, and ancestral chants. Your crew, a family bound by salt and trust. Your stomach's growling, but there's no market or herd here, just what the ocean and your packed provisions offer. Welcome to the Polynesian table, where food was a map, a prayer, and a taste of the islands you sought. The Polynesians, masters of the Pacific, colonized a triangle from Hawaii to New Zealand to Easter Island, a feat of navigation unmatched in ancient times. Their world was the ocean, a highway of currents and constellations, and their food was shaped by its bounty and limits. On islands, they cultivated crops and fished reefs, but on voyages, they carried a portable pantry, blending sea and land to sustain weeks at sea. Food was a lifeline, shared with ceremony to honor gods like Tangaroa, the sea deity. And to keep the crew strong, their cuisine was simple but ingenious. A blend of fish, roots, and coconut that fueled explorers who turned waves into home. Eating wasn't just survival, it was a song of the sea, a way to carry the islands in every bite. So, what's in the hold? Let's start with the staple of every Polynesian meal. Root crops, the hearty gifts of volcanic soil. Taro was king. Its starchy root boiled or steamed into a dense, purple paste called poi. You'd scoop it with your fingers. Its earthy, slightly sour flavor, filling you like a warm tide. On voyages, taro was pre-cooked, wrapped in leaves, and stored in woven baskets, lasting weeks if kept dry. Sweet potatoes, or kumara, were another star, roasted in earth ovens, until caramelized or mashed into a sweet, creamy side, the taste like a hug from the land, soft and sustaining, a reminder of the islands left behind. Breadfruit, round and starchy, was baked whole. Its mild, doughy flesh, a filling snack for a starry night. Fish was the ocean's gift. The heart of the Polynesian plate, you'd cast nets or lines from the canoe, hauling in tuna, mahi-mahi, or reef fish, their scales glinting like the sea's own jewels. Fresh, you'd eat them raw, sliced thin and dressed with seawater and lime, a proto-poke that burst with briny freshness, the taste like the Pacific itself, clean and wild, a jolt that sharpened your gaze for land. On long voyages, fish was dried in the sun or smoked over fires at island stops, turning into chewy strips that lasted months. Sharks, caught with chance to appease their spirits, were grilled or dried, their tough meat a test of jaws but packed with protein. Even sea turtles, ararikach, were roasted, their rich fat a sacred treat offered to chiefs. Coconut was the Polynesians' everything: food, drink, and tool. You'd crack open a green coconut, drinking the clear, sweet water that sloshed inside. A hydrating lifeline under the equatorial sun, the flesh was scraped into a creamy paste, mixed into stews or eaten raw for a fatty boost. Mature coconuts were grated and squeezed for cream, thick and rich, used to thicken fish soups or drizzle over taro. The taste, like a tropical dream, nutty and smooth, cooling you as waves rocked the canoe. Coconut shells doubled as cups or bowls, their husks woven into ropes, making every meal a masterclass in resourcefulness. Vegetables were sparse at sea, but abundant on islands. Seaweed, plucked from reefs, was dried into salty flakes, sprinkled over fish, or boiled into broths for a mineral kick. You'd chew it like a snack, its oceanic crunch, a taste of home. Fern shoots, tender, were steamed or stir-fried with fish, their green bite a rare freshness. Bananas, grown in island groves, were eaten ripe or cooked green, their starchy heft a mini-meal. On voyages, bananas were dried into chewy strips, their sweetness a morale lifter when storms loomed, the taste like a jungle's promise. Bright and versatile, a nod to the land you'd find again. Fruit was the Pacific's candy, a burst of colour in a blue world. Mangoes, juicy and golden, were eaten fresh on islands, their sticky sweetness a sailor's reward. Papayas, soft and orange, were scooped with wooden spoons, their seeds peppery if roasted. Noni, bitter and pungent, was eaten for health. To its funk, a test of willpower, but a boost for weary crews. The taste, like a tropical gamble, sweet or sour, each bite a reminder of the island's generosity. At sea, dried fruits were packed tight, their concentrated sugar a spark of energy when the horizon stayed empty. Drinks were vital, and coconut water was the sea's salvation. Sipped daily to stave off dehydration. Fresh water, stored in bamboo tubes or gourds, was rationed like gold. Its flat taste, a luxury after days of salt spray. For rituals, there was kava, a root pounded into a muddy drink, served in coconut shells at island feasts or before voyages. You'd drink it slowly, its numbing, earthy bitterness, calming nerves and binding the crew in ceremony. The taste, like a dentist's rinse with a spiritual kick. Not delicious, but sacred. A toast to Tangaroa's waves, fermented breadfruit. A fitsibrew was rarer, drunk at festivals to celebrate landfall. Ich dongibus, a fleeting escape. Eating was a communal ritual, even on a rocking canoe. Crews shared meals on woven mats, passing fish or poi, hand to hand, their laughter mingling with the sea's roar. On islands, families ate in open-sided huts. Chiefs served first to honor their manor, or spiritual power. Meals were simple at sea, dried fish, taro, coconut, but abundant on land, where earth ovens, orumu, slow-cooked feasts for hours. You'd dig up a pit of taro, fish, and breadfruit. Their smoky, tender flavors, a welcome home hug. Festivals, like Makahiki in Hawaii, were feasts of roasted pig and carver, uniting communities, Unostalitskis. Every meal began with a chant, thanking the gods for the sea's gifts, ensuring their favor for the next voyage. Voyages made food a science. You'd pack canoes with care, taro and breadfruit in watertight baskets, dried fish in palm fronds, coconuts stacked like cannonballs. Navigators rationed portions, balancing calories with morale, a skill as vital as reading the stars. Fishing mid-ocean was a gamble, nets often empty, forcing reliance on stores. At island stops, you'd trade fish for bananas or repair canoes while roasting a turtle. Food was a map, its presence marking safe routes, its absence a warning of uncharted seas. Sharing meals with new islands sealed alliances. A taro gift, as binding as a handshake. Let's not romanticize the journey. The Pacific was brutal, and food was a constant struggle. Storms could spoil stores, leaving crews to chew seaweed or sip rainwater. Scurvy stalked long voyages. Teeth loosening without fresh fruit. Coconuts rotted. Fish turned rancid. And water gourds leaked, turning thirst into a silent enemy. On small islands, famine followed bad harvests, forcing communities to eat fern roots or fish bones. Social rank meant chiefs ate better fresh fish, pork, while commoners scraped by on poi. Women, who often prepared food, ate last, their labor unseen in a culture that prized male navigators. The sea gave, but it took just as fast. The Polynesians' food tells us who they were: wayfinders, storytellers, and stewards of the sea who turned coconuts into canoes and fish into futures. Their poi was a lesson in resilience, their kava a hymn to unity. Their voyages were a defiance of the ocean's vastness, a way to say, "We'll sail and live." These weren't people who ate for comfort. They ate to explore, to connect, to map a world with their paddles. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact archaeological sites like Lapita in Tonga reveal fish bones, taro pits, and coconut shells, confirming their diet's core. Polynesian oral traditions, like the Hawaiian kumalipo, tie food to creation myths, with taro as a sibling to humans. Odd detail, some Polynesians ate raw sea urchins, cracked open on rocks, their briny goo, a sailor's delicacy. The Hokulea voyages, modern recreations, show how navigators packed food, proving ancient methods' genius. Historians debate the Polynesian diet's strength. Some say its diversity: fish, roots, fruit sustained vast migrations. Others argue its reliance on limited crops made islands vulnerable to drought or overpopulation. Either way, their food was a mirror of their world: vast, resourceful, and deeply spiritual. So, here you are, back in your modern world, the fan's hum, a faint echo of Pacific waves. The Polynesians' food wasn't lavish, but it was real. A saga of salt, roots, and the kind of courage that turns a canoe into a constellation. You think your beach picnic's tropical. Try eating poi under a typhoon's shadow or drinking kava with sharks circling from the rudder. These people ate to live, and their voyages mapped the sea, one fish at a time. Before we move on, I want to hear from you. Would you slurp sea urchins or sip kava? Drop a comment with the most tropical dish you've tried, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories make these seas richer. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more. And join us next time as we gather around the hearths of medieval Europe, where food was a knight's quest. For now, savor your snack and dream of the Pacific's endless blue. Before we gather around tonight's final hearth, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you've savored this journey through history's kitchens. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, what time it is there, and the most medieval-style meal you've ever tried. It's always a joy to see who's joined us from around the globe to taste these ancient tales. Turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's step into the smoky halls of medieval Europe. Part 15, Medieval Europe, Knights and Peasants. The Pacific's sapphire waves recede, the creak of canoes replaced by the clatter of hooves on cobblestone and the crackle of a castle hearth. You're now in medieval Europe, around 1250 CE, standing in a muddy village, or perhaps a stone-walled banquet hall. The air smells of damp straw, roasting meat, and the faint tang of ale. You're either a peasant, toiling in fields for a crust of bread, or a knight, your armor polished for a lord's feast. Your stomach's growling, and dinner depends on your station, gruel for the many, venison for the few. Welcome to the medieval table, where food was a divide, a ritual, and a taste of a world both gritty and grand. Medieval Europe, from England's fog to Italy's sun, was a patchwork of fiefs, monasteries, and crusades, a time of faith, food, and famine. Food was the pulse of this world, a marker of class in a society split between lords and labourers. Peasants, the backbone of the land, ate to survive, their meals scraped from fields and flavoured with little but hope. Knights and nobles, the sword and sceptre, uttered to display their feasts, a parade of power that could bankrupt a manor, yet both shared a reliance on grain, a love of ale, and a belief that every meal was a gift from God or a test of endurance. Eating wasn't just living, it was a reflection of your place under heaven's gaze. Let's start with the peasant's lot. A diet as plain as the dirt under their nails. The cornerstone was bread, but not the fluffy loaves of today. You'd get coarser, black rye or barley bread, gritty with bran, and baked in communal ovens. It was dense, heavy, and sometimes mouldy. But you'd tear off a hunk, dip it in pottage, and call it supper. Pottage was the peasant's lifeline, a watery stew of barley, peas, or lentils, simmered with whatever you could scrounge: onions, leeks, or a sad carrot. If you were lucky, a scrap of bacon or fishbone added flavour, the taste like a warm sigh. Bland but filling, a reminder that hunger was worse than boredom. Vegetables were a peasant's mainstay, grown in small plots or foraged from hedgerows. Cabbage, turnips, and parsnips were boiled into pottage or eaten raw, their earthy crunch a break from the mush. Wild greens, like nettle or dandelion, were stewed, their bitterness a poor man's spice. Herbs like parsley or thyme, if you had a garden, gave a faint lift, but salt was a luxury. hoarded like gold. Protein was a dream: eggs from a hen, cheese from a shared cow, or fish from a stream. Salted to last the winter. Meat was rare, maybe a rabbit snared in the woods or a pig shared at harvest. Its every scrap boiled into broth. The taste greasy, gamey, a fleeting joy in a life of gruel. Now, let's storm the castle for a night's feast, where food was a weapon of wealth. Picture a great hall, its walls hung with tapestries, lit by torches and the glint of silver goblets. The centerpiece was meat venison, boar, or svan, roasted whole on spits, the fat dripping into fires that roared like a dragon's breath. You'd carve a slice, the meat tender and smoky, drenched in sauces of wine, pepper, or mustard, spices that cost more than a peasant's yearly wage. The taste, like a battlefield victory, rich and bold, each bite a flex of your lord's power. Fowl, like peacock or heron, were served with feathers reattached. A dish as much art as meal. Bread for nobles was white, made from sifted wheat, soft and airy, a far cry from the peasant's brick. It was paired with trenchers, thick bread slabs used as plates, soaked in gravy and eaten last. Side dishes included frumenti, a wheat porridge laced with almonds and saffron, or vegetables like peas, glazed with honey for sweetness. Desserts were a lord's pride, custards spiced with cinnamon, marzipan shaped into castles, or fruit tarts bursting with cherries. The taste, like a king's ransom, sweet and exotic, a reminder that the world's riches flowed to the high table. Drink tied both worlds together, and ale was king. Peasants drank weak, cloudy ale, brewed from barley and drunk daily, safer than water and packed with calories. You'd sip it from wooden mugs. It's sour, malty tang, a small comfort after a day in the fields. The taste, like a grumpy hug. Not fancy, but reliable, keeping you upright through winter's chill. Nobles drank stronger ale or imported wine. Ruby red from Bordeaux, poured from silver ewers. Mead, honey sweet and potent, graced high feasts. Its warmth loosening tongues for tales of chivalry. Water, often foul, was avoided, making ale the lifeblood of all, from serf to king. Eating was a ritual, shaped by faith and rank. Peasants ate on rough benches, sharing pottage from a single pot, their hands greasy as they passed bread. Meals were quick, squeezed between dawn's plough and dusk's prayers. With grace, said to thank God for scraps, nobles dined in splendor, reclining at trestle tables, their feasts stretching hours with minstrels and jesters. A lord's banquet was theatre swans carved with flair, wine poured in cascades, every course a show of dominance. Yet, even nights, said Grace, and Lent's fasts bound all to fish and gruel, a nod to humility in a divided world. Feasts were the medieval pulse, especially for nobles. A knight's wedding or a king's coronation meant days of eating whole oxen roasted, pies stuffed with songbirds, and barrels of ale drained dry. These were alliances sealed in Greece, with guests ranked by seating, the lowborn at the hall's end, nibbling stale bread. Peasants joined village feasts at harvest or Christmas, sharing pork or mutton from a lord's gift. Their laughter, a rare break from toil. Food was a bridge, however uneven, uniting communities under the church's shadow, where every bite was a prayer for bounty or forgiveness. Let's not sugarcoat the era. Life was brutal, and food was a gamble. Peasants faced famine when rains failed. their pottage thinned to water, their children chewing bark. Bread was often mouldy, al-sur, and disease lurked in tainted meat or streams. Scurvy and rickets haunted the poor, their diets lacking fruit or fat. Nobles weren't immune. Overindulgence led to gout, and spices couldn't mask spoiled venison. The gap between rich and poor was stark. A night's feast could feed a village, yet serfs starved to fund it. Women, grinding grain or stirring cauldrons, ate least, their labor feeding others in a world that valued swords over spoons. Medieval food tells us who they were, not just eaters, but strivers in a world of mud and miracles. The peasant's pottage was a lesson in grit. The knight's swan, a hymn to ambition. Their feasts were a defiance of famine, a way to say, "We'll eat and endure." These weren't people who ate for joy. They ate to live, to pray, to dream of a harvest that might not come. Let's ground this in history. Mainstream fact medieval manuscripts, like the Taquinum Sanitatis, list pottage, bread, and ale as peasant staples, while noble menus included spiced meats. Archaeological digs at York reveal rye grains and fish bones, confirming the divide. Odd detail: some peasants ate hedgehog, roasted in clay, a spiky snack that sounds like a dare, but was protein in a pinch. The Bayeux tapestry shows Norman feasts, tying food to conquest. Historians debate medieval diets. Some say the peasants' grain-heavy meals sustained Europe's growth, while nobles' excess fueled trade for spices. Others argue famines and malnutrition weakened societies, paving the way for plagues. Either way, their food was a mirror of their world divided, devout, and stubbornly alive. So, here you are, back in your modern world. The fans hum, a faint echo of a castle's hearth. Medieval food wasn't elegant, but it was real. A tale of gruel, glory, and the kind of faith that turns barley into bread. You think your stew's rustic? Try eating pottage for a year, or feasting on swan while serfs starve. These people ate to live, and their tables built a world, one crust at a time. Before we close this series, I want to hear from you. Would you sip sour ale or tackle a hedgehog? Drop a comment with the most medieval-style meal you've tried, where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Your stories have made this journey richer. Hit subscribe if you're hungry for more tales. And thank you for traveling with us from steppes to seas, jungles to hearths. For now, savor your snack and dream of a world where every meal was a story.